Chapter 11:17. With the existence of incense tablets, it meant that they could use the incense of the thousands of families to rebuild their original source. Of course, it was hard to say whether the two generals Heng and Ha that were born from the incense of the thousands of families could be considered as their own. But what did this have to do with the heavenly court and the Western sect? They were only interested in the abilities of the two generals Heng and Ha. As long as they were useful, it was fine. After all, they were not the ones who died. But this Mosquito Dowran, not to mention that Mosquito Dowran had disappeared after the investiture of the gods' cataclysm. Even if Mosquito Dowran had made a name for himself like the two generals Heng and Ha, could it change the situation of his certain death? That was obviously impossible. Don't forget, the one who wanted to kill Mosquito Dowran was never Lin Yuan, but Lord Shengqing, who had been silently watching. After having a certain level of cultivation, death was actually not scary. Unless the world in which the three realms of heaven, earth, and man developed harmoniously, there was an existence in the netherworld that no one could afford to offend. Only then would one have to obediently enter the cycle of reincarnation after death. It was not like the three major underworlds in the untainted world, which were just decorations. Not to mention those powerful characters, even ghosts with strong resentment could not be taken away. So what if Empress Pingxin claimed to be invincible in the netherworld? If the 6 heavenly sages came to find her, wouldn't she have to let them go? Ask Empress Pingxin if she dared to directly declare war on the various forces in the untainted world. If Empress Pingxin was alone, she would most likely make Hongjun and the Xianmen pay the price at all costs. But speaking of which, Empress Pingxin was never alone. Back then, she was schemed against by Hongjun and turned into the cycle of reincarnation. As a result, the 12 ancestors of sorcerers were unable to set up the great formation of the deities of heaven in the absence of one of them. They could only fight head-on with the demon race. In the end, no one ended up well. The human race who had been hiding in the dark jumped out and created a loophole. Therefore, Empress Pingxin felt guilty towards the sorcerer tribe. Those surviving magi broke into the netherworld and finally found protection from Empress Pingxin. Who would have thought that Empress Pingxin would give up on these magi people and plot against the other gods by any means? If the netherworld didn't have an invincible master overseeing it, or if this master had some scruples, it would evolve into the netherworld of the untainted world. Under normal circumstances, nothing would interfere with the operation of the netherworld. However, when necessary, the reincarnation of the netherworld was nothing. Not to mention the Tathagata, who stuffed the golden cicada into the reincarnation furnace to be reborn, or the Tathagata, who was more ruthless like the Tathagata. He directly let his good corpse incarnation enter the reincarnation cycle and reincarnate into the spring and autumn warring states period, becoming the founder of the Taoist sect. He directly pulled down Hongjun from the altar and completed the transformation from one of the 6 heavenly sages to a sage of the Great Path. He even put the Taoist sect under the command of the Taoist sect and took away the position of the Taoist sect. The 6-soul banner was the ultimate killing move prepared by the Tongtian sect leader in the Battle of the Innumerable Immortals formation. The person who waved the 6-soul banner would inevitably be swallowed by the remnant thoughts of the 3,000 demonic gods. Even this could be done by the sages, who could take out a bit of the true spirit from the reincarnation cycle to reconstruct the physical body. The price to pay was just to think about what gifts to bring to visit Empress Pingxin and how to act obedient so that Empress Pingxin would be merciful. Like the heaven martial world, where the reincarnation cycle had not been completed, it was the same whether it was a human or a ghost. As long as enough backup plans were prepared, they could complete the nirvana rebirth. The so-called reincarnation cycle was almost no different from a decoration. When the physical body was destroyed, the primordial spirit ran away. This was something that the living beings of the untainted land were most familiar with. This was because ever since Pan Gu created the world, the untainted land was constantly undergoing incomparably cruel battles. Almost every day, there would be the fall of almighty people and the rise of new nobles. These were common occurrences. Therefore, even if Mosquito Dowran did not die in the black water of the nether realm, it was not a big deal. With Shunqing Skylord watching from the side, Lin Yuan really did not believe that Mosquito Dowran could leave the Tianwu world alive. Did he really think that Shunqing Skylord was just a decoration that only knew how to watch the show? More importantly, if it really came to that step, what did killing Mosquito Dowran have to do with Shunqing Skylord? Everyone saw that Mosquito Dowran was no match for Black Jiao in the battle of magical powers and finally died in the hands of Black Jiao. What did he do? He had merely squashed a lost primordial spirit to death. With a thought, Lin Yuan suddenly calmed down and said in his heart, "System, stop pretending to be dead. Weren't you very active when you were lamenting about the Supreme? Come, tell me, where's my Yao core?" The system maintained its silence as usual. Lin Yuan slightly narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "It's fine if you don't say it. But the problem is, do you believe that if you don't say it, I'll ask someone else and they'll tell me? Are you threatening me?" After being mocked by Lin Yuan, the system suddenly showed a line of words. Of course, it knew that the someone else that Lin Yuan was talking about was Hongjun. If Lin Yuan asked Hongjun this question, Hongjun would definitely not hesitate and would immediately tell him what was going on with his Yao core. It would not even make any requests to Lin Yuan. Because in Hongjun's view, his actions were to drive a wedge between Lin Yuan and it. When the time comes, without this dead end entering the scene, Hongjun really did not care about the system. This time, the one who remained silent was Lin Yuan. Although he did not reply, the silence at this time was enough to prove Lin Yuan's attitude. "You don't think that I took your Yao core and planned to use it to hold you hostage, do you? Is there a problem with you or with me? You're only one step away from the immortal state now. The Yao core is already something that you can do without. Then why do you think I took your Yao core? I know that it's useless to you, but I still want to hold it in my hand to disgust you." The system showed the words again, and the words were very thick, as if it was expressing its anger. Hearing this, Lin Yuan slightly narrowed his eyes. What was that saying again? There was no loyalty in the Sui and Tang dynasties. It was the same in the Eldritch Age. In the entire Eldritch Age, there were almost no characters with good character. Lin Yuan also knew that once he stepped into the Demon King Age, even if he lost the system, he could still gather the power of incense. With the help of the Tao of totems that he walked on, the Yao core was indeed not that important. However, in the Eldritch Age, there were all kinds of strange ways to kill people. For example, in some unorthodox ways, just knowing the name of a person could make a person extremely unlucky. If it was supplemented by a personal item or hair, it could even complete a long-range killing curse. Otherwise, those Eldritch Age bosses would not have practiced the magical powers that could sense people's names just once. Lin Yuan didn't even dare to think about what kind of blow he would suffer if his monster core was taken by others to perform unorthodox techniques. Chapter 11:18. This involves some secrets. I can't tell you directly, but I can guarantee that your Yao core is definitely not in my hands. Moreover, even if the Yao core of this body of yours is in my hands, I won't use any unorthodox methods. Bah! I can't use any unorthodox methods. I am the heavenly Tao, how could I use such things? The system was still using bold words to emphasize its anger. Lin Yuan still narrowed his eyes, as if he was weighing the system's words. For some reason, he had an inexplicable sense of trust in the system's words. If you really don't trust me, you can go and check the monsters you created. They don't have Yao cores, so they are actually no different from this body of yours. If you really want to find fault, I can only say that their consciousness was personally given by you. However, you are different. You are a lucky person that I randomly picked from the ancient times. Do you understand? Lin Yuan thought for a moment, then sneered, so what you mean is that I am still under your control. Even if you can't do anything to my soul, this body was created by you. From the beginning, I can only stand on the same boat as you. I think you might be mistaken about something. First of all, the monsters created by the system don't necessarily have to stand on the same boat as their master. Unless you directly instilled a large amount of false memories into them like you did, causing them to be loyal and devoted to you from the moment they were born until death. However, you should know that I have never done such a thing to you, right? Therefore, it is impossible for you to have feelings of loyalty and devotion to me. However, there are some rules that are actually very pleasing. For example, if the monsters created by the system don't have the memories and concepts that you instilled, their bottom line is that they will not directly harm you. However, not directly is the biggest word game. For example, if you rely on that person, then I can't do anything about it. On the other hand, you can even deduce some of my arrangements and tell that person about it. From there, you can attack me because this does not violate the rules. After all, you did not directly harm me. This is a lesson learned from the mistakes of others. It is precisely because of that incident that I decided on the current strategy, which is to completely give up on letting you guys grow together and cooperate with each other. Instead, I will adopt the method of each person having their own world. All communication and transactions will be carried out through me. Last time, when you asked for help, I chose someone who already knew the coordinates of the Tianwu world. Then it is not difficult for you to guess that since I have learned from the mistakes of others, I will definitely not let those traitors off. However, in reality, I chose the current strategy, not because I don't hate them, but because I can't do anything. So, you still suspect that I took your Yaocore. The system's expression, the system's words, the system's the system's following the system's series of explanations, Lin Yuan's suspicions grew even stronger. The system's methods were all the same, especially this body of his. From the black snake to the water flood dragon, it was changed at will after a certain condition was met. If this body was not created by the system, Lin Yuan would have plucked his head off on the spot. However, Lin Yuan had used the system's ability to create before. Although it could combine different materials to create a new demonic beast, it did not skimp on the materials. While creating the demonic beast, it also took away a certain part of the demonic beast's abilities. However, if the demonic beast was really created, would it not produce a Yaocore? Or could it be that the system had only given him a portion of the authority, and it was just acting? The system's explanation was half true and half false. Not to mention whether or not there had really been a case where the host had betrayed it, it would be a huge joke to say that the system had no way of dealing with betrayers. After all, hosts like them were sent to various worlds from the moment they were selected. They enjoyed the benefits brought by the system and grew rapidly. Even those with mediocre qualifications could quickly improve themselves according to the system's planned growth path. It was like a complete assembly line, providing the system with an endless supply of powerful soldiers to fight against Hongjun. However, was it possible for the system to be defenseless against them? There was no need to use Hongjun, a fierce person who had stabbed it in the back a long time ago. The system had lived for so many years and had been to countless worlds. With this experience, it was impossible for it not to know what would happen if it allowed the power in its hands to grow without limit. When that time came, even Hongjun would have to stand aside. As for guarding against traitors, sending the hosts to different worlds, this sounded like a typical lie. Although the Eldritch world had been hunting down the system and its subordinates all these years, the current situation in the Eldritch world was completely different from when it had escaped. First of all, the Grand Supreme had become a Chaos Daluo Golden Immortal, but he was unwilling to leave the Eldritch world to find another way out. Obviously, he wanted to take revenge on Hongjun. Besides the Grand Supreme, there was at least one other Almighty in the Eldritch world who could fight against Hongjun. Otherwise, Hongjun would not have watched the Grand Supreme become a Chaos Daluo Golden Immortal. Therefore, even if the system did not take action, Hongjun's position in the Eldritch world was in danger. Under such circumstances, not to mention a small world like the Tianwu world, it was not suitable for the Eldritch world to settle down. Even if it was a medium-class world or an upper-class world, unless it was confirmed that there was someone Hong Jun had to kill, or there was news of the appearance of a strange treasure, Hong Jun would not leave the eldritch world without permission. He would also not casually release his capable subordinates. Just like this time, Hong Jun already knew that his death tribulation was in the Tianwu world, but he still only sent Mosquito Daoren, Generals Heng and Ha. It was as if he did not care about Lin Yuan, the system, and the eldritch world's eldritch world. Lin Yuan. Thinking of this, Lin Yuan's expression suddenly changed. Generals Heng, Ha and Mosquito Daoren. Such a lineup, was it really to assassinate him? With Hong Juan's ability, when he last projected his consciousness, he had already confirmed the existence of the Shangqing Heavenly Lord. Therefore, with such a lineup, was it certain that Generals Heng and Ha did not send Mosquito Daoren to his death? Or, to set off a calamity? When he thought of this, Lin Yuan suddenly laughed bitterly and muttered, "I still underestimated you." Chapter 11:19. The cultivation tribulation was not a particularly lofty thing. To put it bluntly, it was also a kind of rule. The total amount of resources did not change, but the population was constantly increasing. When the population rose to a certain level, it would lead to the uneven distribution of all kinds of resources. That was the outbreak after the intertwining of fate and the superimposition of the chain of cause and effect. To put it simply, the things that could be obtained in one's hands were barely enough to support one's cultivation. At this time, if one wanted to live a better life, or even just to survive, one had to start a war with other people and other clans. The four great tribulations after the opening of the sky were all like this. To put it bluntly, it was because there were not enough resources to share, so various clans started to fight. With the fall of the dragon, Phoenix, Kirin, Wu tribe, Demon tribe, and many other forces that dominated the untainted land, the weak human tribe became the main character, which also meant that Hong Jun had complete control over the untainted land. The investiture of the gods and the journey to the west were almost all planned by him. At this time, what they lacked was not resources, but Taoist orthodoxy and incense. Of course, the most terrifying cultivation tribulation was the first tribulation of the Dragon Han era. It was a period when resources were exhausted and could not be regenerated. The three clans each had their own territories, but they had to fight crazily, not for hegemony, but for survival. In this process, some people would inevitably be eliminated, and even all lives would be destroyed. After countless years, countless resources would be regenerated, and new lives would be born. After the first tribulation of the Dragon Han era, the dragon tribe declined and retreated to the four seas. Then, they began to go downhill. From the overlord after the opening of the sky to the point where even a demon king could abuse his power in the four seas, one could imagine how terrible the dragon tribe was hit. The Phoenix tribe also disappeared. Except for Kong Xian, Qinghuan, and other great demons, there were few who could fight. Kirin was even more miserable. It had to rely on the way of heaven to become an auspicious representative. Otherwise, Kirin would have been exterminated during the first tribulation of the Dragon Han era. The legendary immeasurable calamity was not handled properly during the calamity stage, causing the calamity to become immeasurable calamity. The entire world had begun to collapse and had completely evolved into despair. At that time, it could be said that no one below the sage realm would be able to survive. There were 5 catastrophes in the untainted world: Kai Tian, Long Han, Lich, Investiture of the Gods, and Journey to the West. Except for Pangu's Battle of Kai Tian, the other 4 catastrophes were handled well under Hongjuan's control. They were even planned by him. After the journey to the west, the untainted world entered a relatively stable period, which was the period when Hongjun was completely ruling. It was also a period of crazy wars. Those who were observant would realize that during the period from the establishment of the heavenly court to the calamity of the journey to the west, the heavenly court had gradually become stronger. Just on the surface, there were a total of 33 heavens. Taoism also had 10 big grotto heavens, 36 small grotto heavens, and 72 blessed lands. The Western sect also had the ever-expanding Western Pure Land of ultimate bliss. Even the unorthodox sects that were derived from Taoism such as the school of Yin Yang also had the 3 islands of Penglai, Fangzhang, and Yingzhou. If these places were placed in the normal world, they would all be ordinary names. At most, they would have beautiful scenery and a mysterious color. However, in the mythical world, these places were all the grotto heavens and blessed lands that were formed when the untainted world conquered all the worlds in the untainted world. Ever since the untainted world entered a stable period, all the wars were against the outside world. If one thought about it carefully, they would realize that there had been no more catastrophes in the untainted world since the calamity of the journey to the west. Therefore, many things had 2 sides to them. Hongjun was indeed a complete dictator. He even stabbed the heavenly Tao in the back with his own strength, suppressed the Tao of humanity and Tao, and tampered with the cultivation path left for the future generations. In the later period, the cultivators became weaker. In the early days, there were still a few itinerant immortals who could fight with the old untainted world experts. As the Chan sect and the Ren sect slowly declined, the cultivation path was almost cut off. Those old untainted world experts were also regarded by Hongjun as slaves, lackeys, and prisoners. However, on the other hand, Hongjun also helped the untainted world to avoid the calamity of the catastrophes. He also set up a series of rules, set up the heavenly court, and gave those cultivators a chance to be ranked as immortals. One could say that he was cultivating his wings, but one could not ignore his contributions to the untainted world, even if his starting point was for himself. But then again, since ancient times, in the untainted world, how many amazing talents were there? Yang Mei, Qin Kuan, Shi Qin, and a series of big shots, which one of them could shake the untainted world from time to time. During the initial tribulation of the Dragon Han, the ancestor dragon, the original Kirin, the 12 ancestors of sorcery, the East Emperor Tai Yi, and the Emperor Jun during the Great War of Sorcery and Demon. Any one of them was enough to kill the untainted world. Otherwise, the war between them would not have affected the entire untainted world. However, except for Hongjun, who dared to say that he could control, plan, shift the catastrophes, and even gain a lot of benefits from the catastrophes. The title of Tao Ancestor might not be suitable for Hongjun, but he was definitely the king of catastrophes. Based on the fact that Hongjun could dominate the untainted world, there was no reason for him to be a person who did not use his brain. Such a person would usually plan before acting. If he was not completely confident, he would prepare a few more backup plans. Now, Mosquito Daoran was captured by Lin Yuan, and Generals Heng and Ha were suppressed by the 99 soul-scattering gourd. The situation could not be worse. Hongjun's backup plan, or one of his backup plans, should show up at this time. However, the reality was, there was nothing strange. This did not make sense. Even if the backup plan could not kill Lin Yuan, in order to pave the way for other backup plans, a group of people should jump out at this time to kill Lin Yuan as much as possible. Therefore, the only explanation was that Hongjun felt that Mosquito Daoran and Generals Heng and Ha were enough to kill Lin Yuan. That was the situation. Therefore, Lin Yuan was sure that Mosquito Daoran, Heng and Ha did not come to the Heaven Martial World to kill him. In other words, this was not Hongjun's main purpose. After careful calculation, the Heaven Sovereign was about to be completed. At that time, there would be a change. Mosquito Daoran came to the untainted world to die. It was equivalent to repaying the karma he owed to the Jia school during the apotheosized catastrophes. At this time, the consequences of a chain of karma were unpredictable. Perhaps nothing would happen, or it could set off a terrifying catastrophes. He had thought that he had overestimated Hongjun, but he did not expect that the real killing move was hidden here. With a thought, the nether realm's black water that had been injected into the sealed space began to flow backward. It turned into black threads again and merged into Lin Yuan's scales. He gave up on chasing Mosquito Daoran. Chapter 11:20. Mosquito Daoran could not be killed. At the very least, he couldn't kill him yet. Mosquito Daoran had killed the Holy Mother of Turtle Spirit. Even if he had the protection of the Grand Supreme, it was under the Grand Supreme's nose. Otherwise, with the protective nature of the sect leader, as long as he saw Mosquito Daoran, there was absolutely no possibility of him letting him go. Everyone was well aware of this. Therefore, in the investiture of the gods, although Mosquito Daoran had destroyed the plan of the Western sect and turned the Grand Supreme into a Buddha, which could be said to have made a great contribution, he did not receive any reward. He could only conceal his identity and not appear in the world. This was probably because the sect leader took the Grand Supreme into consideration. Otherwise, Mosquito Daoran's body and soul would have been destroyed. However, this time, Hongjun asked Generals Hang and Ha to accompany Mosquito Daoran to the Tianwu world. His purpose was to make up for this karma. This was Mosquito Daoran who had violated the agreement between the sect leader and the Grand Supreme. Not only did he come out again, but he also ran under the sect leader's nose. If it was not because he did not want to be associated with the Grand Supreme, the Shangqing Skylord would have killed Mosquito Daoran long ago. He would not have prepared a set of immortal slaying sword formation as a reward. Interesting, really interesting. Lin Yuan muttered to himself with a gloomy look. He murmured, "You are indeed an existence who plays with the heroes of the untainted land in the palm of your hand. If you were not so confident to the point of conceit, I would have fallen into your trap." It was not clear how long the Shangqing Skylord had been active in the Tianwu world. However, when the ancient demon court suddenly disbanded, it was most likely because of this person. Otherwise, without the intervention of the Almighty of the untainted land, this group of escapees would not be willing to disappear without a trace. After all, no matter how one looked at it, the natives of the Tianwu world were not a match for this group of Almighty of the untainted land. Therefore, it was highly possible that Shangqing Tianzuan had imperceptibly intertwined with the karmic chain of the Tianwu world. The sudden appearance of Mosquito Daoran was tantamount to messing up the already messy karmic chain of the Tianwu world. Once there was a mistake, all the karmic chain of the Tianwu world would explode, artificially leading to a terrifying calamity. It was hard to say exactly how long the Heaven Martial world had existed, but one thing was certain. The Heaven Martial world was extremely ancient. After all, the existence of an ancient almighty like Hanbo wasn't a big deal. However, Daoist Red Cloud was no small character. He was originally one of the 6 saints. During the time when Daoist Red Cloud was favored, even the Western sect's Urshi had to step aside. From this, it could be seen that although Daoist Red Cloud had appeared when the Western sect's Urshi saw Red Cloud, they would most likely have to call him senior apprentice brother. Since an existence like Daoist Red Cloud had ruthlessly tricked Hongjun, it meant that Hongjun would definitely not let Daoist Red Cloud go. Because Hongjun was a dictator, and he was extremely suspicious. Even if he had the strength to look down on the untainted land, he still schemed against his juniors. He even hid his true cultivation path. At the same time, this also showed that Hongjun's desire for control was extremely strong. He would not allow anyone to challenge his authority to appear. The reason why he could tolerate Ping Xan and Tai Xiang was that Hongjun wasn't confident that he could kill them. Would a dictator like Hongjun allow someone like Daoist Red Cloud to exist? Ping Xan and Tai Xiang were existences that Hongjun couldn't deal with even if he wanted to. However, Daoist Red Cloud didn't have the strength of a saint. So as soon as he appeared, he would be heavily targeted by Hongjun. The reason he had been able to live peacefully until now was mostly because Daoist Red Cloud had been obediently staying in the Heaven Martial world all this time. From this, it could be seen that although the Heaven Martial world was a minor kiliocosm, it had existed for as long as the untainted land. The untainted land and primordial chaos were 2 different concepts. The untainted land referred to the world formed after Pan-gu had split heaven and earth apart, not the primordial chaos that had given birth to 3,000 ancient gods and devils. During the heaven-splitting calamity, why had Pan-gu fought 3,000 ancient gods and devils? Because when the untainted land was first created, it was only a minor kiliacosm. It was impossible for it to contain 3,000 ancient gods and devils. So, Pan-gu had no choice but to fight against the devils that had been born from the primordial chaos. But even so, there were still people like Yang Mei, Hong Jun, Qian Kun, and others who had escaped the net. In order to prevent the untainted land that he had painstakingly created from being destroyed in an instant, Pan-gu had stretched out his neck and killed himself. He had transformed into the untainted land, causing the untainted land to transform from a minor kiliacosm to a middle kiliacosm, and even a major kiliacosm. The heaven martial world was still a minor kiliacosm while the untainted land had become a major kiliacosm. This could only prove the greatness and terror of the great god Pan-gu. At the same time, it also proved that the secret of the heaven martial world was not simple. During this long period of time, the heaven martial world had probably experienced many calamities. For example, the disintegration of the ancient demon court and the grassland wolf tribe and the other great demon clans had secluded themselves from the world. But now, the heaven martial world could be said to have been peaceful for a long time. In such a world, no matter how many karmic chains had accumulated, it was not enough to shock Lin Yuan. Even without the interference of outsiders like Lin Yuan, Daoist Red Cloud, and Shangqing Tianzuan, the next calamity would probably not be far away. Seeing that the heaven and earth were about to be repaired, there would definitely be strange phenomena. It was normal for a calamity to occur. Even if it was to fight for the secret of the heaven martial world, the natives of the heaven martial world would beat the brains out of people. The only thing that surprised him was that Hong Jun had only projected the heaven martial world once. But he was able to make an accurate judgment that Lin Yuan, who had stayed in the heaven martial world for close to 3 years, could not make. He sent Generals Hang Ha and Mosquito Daoren in an attempt to cause a calamity. The word terrifying could not be more appropriate. What was even more terrifying was that if he did not have a sudden inspiration, he would have fallen into Hong Jun's trap. This point, even Shangqing Tianzuan, who was in the middle of it all, did not realize. After all, the existence of Shangqing Tianzuan was the most important part of Hong Jun's plan. Thinking of this, Lin Yuan glanced in the direction of Shangqing Tianzuan with a complicated expression. He sighed faintly. Shangqing Tianzuan was probably still waiting for him to kill Mosquito Daoren. Even if he did not kill Mosquito Daoren, Shangqing Tianzuan would do it himself. Because he did not care. He was just an incarnation of the good corpse. Not to mention whether he had the means to go through the calamity, even if he did not, it was just a matter of time for the original body to condense him again. But for revenge, there was really no such shop after this village. He could not kill Mosquito Daoren in front of the Grand Supreme, could he? Chapter 11:21. To have such a, no, 2 younger brothers. Even an existence like the Grand Supreme would feel tired, right? One would die trying to protect his own, the other would die trying to save his face. Even the Grand Elder, who could suppress Yuanshi and Tong Tian, did not want to do anything with the 2 of them. He sent Tong Tian away for the sake of the disciples of the tribe of Jia who bore the thunder during the God investiture tribulation. He also sent Tong Tian away to avoid exposing the Grand Elder's plan. That was why he sent Tong Tian away, right? Of course, it had to be said that the Grand Supreme and Hong Jun had reached a strange tacit understanding. If one thought about it carefully, one could see that Hong Jun's purpose was to set off a cultivation tribulation in the Tianwu world to eliminate Lin Yuan. After all, the cultivation tribulation was merciless. Only by becoming a saint could one survive the cultivation tribulation. Even if Lin Yuan had the protection of the system and the will of the world, he would not dare to say that he could survive the cultivation tribulation. Similarly, this was the most likely plan to kill Lin Yuan before the Tianwu world was promoted. There was an absolute karmic chain between Mosquito Daoren and Tong Tian, and it was not an ordinary karmic chain. The conflict between them came from another world, and this world was much stronger than the Tianwu world. This karmic chain could be considered ancient. If it was suddenly stuffed into the karmic chain of the Tianwu world, it would definitely be incompatible and complicated. Once it was triggered, it would instantly trigger all the karma chains. Moreover, who said that only Mosquito Daoren and Shang-Qing Skylord had a karma chain? Hang and Ha were not there for decoration, and they were not there to simply escort Mosquito Daoren to the Tianwu world. After the investiture of the gods, Mosquito Daoren and the Grand Supreme worked together to destroy the Western sect's golden lotus of merit. Then, the Grand Supreme turned into a Buddha and became the Shakyamuni. However, there was also a saying that the Grand Supreme turned into a Buddha. The Western sect could not sit still and allow the Grand Supreme to take away the Western sect's merit and luck. Therefore, they separated Mahayana Buddhism and Hinayana Buddhism, and used Mahayana Buddhism to suppress Hinayana Buddhism to suppress the Grand Supreme. Looking at General Hang and General Ha, the two of them were originally the generals of the Zhou dynasty when they fought against King Zhou on behalf of the heavens. There were a lot of karmic chains between them. After they died, they were conferred as gods and served the Western religious sect completely. They guarded the mountain gate of the Western religious sect for countless years and preached the teachings of the Western religious sect. Even if they did not make any contributions, they could at least work hard. They were not well known in the Western religious sect, but they were definitely not small figures. Therefore, this was the Western sect's stance. Hang and Ha accompanied Mosquito Daoren to their deaths. To put it bluntly, Hongjun needed to use the karmic chain between Mosquito Daoren and Shang-Qing Skylord to trigger the Tianwu world's cultivation tribulation. Now that the Grand Supreme had become a sage, although no one knew what he was planning, he obviously did not need to give face to Hongjun. Since he agreed to this, he must have his own considerations. After these considerations, the Western sect that suppressed the Grand Supreme would not have an easy time. Hongjun was naturally happy to see this scene. After all, this involved the battle between Buddhism and Taoism, and even the battle between Mahayana Buddhism and Hinayana Buddhism. In addition to the karma from the investiture of the gods and the karma from the Xianmen tribulation, the karma from the Xianmen tribulation, and all kinds of factors gathered together. Although the Tianwu world's cultivation tribulation could not be directly pushed to the level of immeasurable, its scale would definitely not be small. For the existence below the sage, the cultivation tribulation was definitely a terrifying thing. Strong experts like the ancestral dragon, Yuan Feng, and Shixiang Qiren, who quickly became the masters of the world after the untainted land, were still either killed or sealed in the cultivation tribulation. Later, the 12 ancestral sorcerers, Eastern Emperor Tai, Emperor Jun and other experts not only shattered the untainted land, but also crashed into Mount Buzhou and were almost wiped out. No one dared to say that they could play with the cultivation tribulation. Except for Hongjun, the king of the cultivation tribulation. Lin Yuan pondered for a moment and glanced at Shang-Qing Skylord, who was standing in the corner. He activated the All Things Have Spirit skill and directly began to communicate with Shang-Qing Skylord through consciousness. He also explained his point of view. The cultivation tribulation. I see, Shang-Qing Skylord's eyes turned slightly. There was no sadness or joy on his face, but he whispered softly. The Grand Elder asked his disciple to come, not to help that old thief, but back then. No, how is this possible? Could it be that he had already foreseen this day? Back then, the Grand Elder and the Prime of Heaven had a verbal agreement. Even if the Prime of Heaven knew that Mosquito Daoren did not really want to kill the Holy Mother of Turtle Spirit, he was just schemed against by the Western sect. During the time when the Grand Elder set a trap for Mosquito Daoren to be captured by the Daoist guide, Mosquito Daoren could be said to have been tortured. In addition, his stomach was rumbling with hunger. Suddenly, he was released by the White Lotus boy. When he saw a 10,000-year-old black tortoise that had been beaten back to its original form and was covered in injuries, his ferocity was stimulated. It should be known that the blood-winged black mosquito was an existence that was born in the netherworld blood sea. Looking at the Nether River Patriarch's great wish of killing all living beings to prove his Tao, one would know that there was no quality that could be related to good that was born in this area. However, whether it was intentional or not, the Holy Mother of Turtle Spirit died in the hands of the blood-winged black mosquito. For the Prime of Heaven, who was protective of his disciples, the two sides were mortal enemies. The Western sect could find the Western sect for their schemes in the future. Whether Mosquito Daoran was willing or not, since he was stained with the blood of the Prime of Heaven's disciple, he could not think of escaping unscathed. The Prime of Heaven's protectiveness was so terrifying. However, there was never a fairy tale in the world of adults. What remained unchanged was always benefits. The Grand Elder and the Premier saved most of the disciples of the GS sect. At the same time, they sent the Prime of Heaven out of the untainted world in exchange for some promises from the Prime of Heaven. One of them was that if the Prime of Heaven saw Mosquito Daoran in the future, he could kill him. However, the Grand Elder only gave him one chance. If the Prime of Heaven did not kill Mosquito Daoran directly, then the karma would be over. Now, it seemed that the Grand Supreme had long predicted this day. Now, he had already attacked Mosquito Daoran. Not only did he attack, but he also successfully captured Mosquito Daoran. However, in the current situation, once Mosquito Daoran died, the Tianwu world would be set off a calamity. At that time, not to mention what the Black Jiao and the Red Cloud would think, even the Prime of Heaven himself could not guarantee that the incarnation of the good corpse could survive the calamity safely. However, if he let him go, it was hard to say whether he would have a chance to avenge his disciple in the future. Especially after the Grand Elder's enlightenment, the Prime of Heaven did not dare to say that he could not defeat the Grand Elder. Without this karma, if Mosquito Daoran came out again in the future, the Prime of Heaven could only watch helplessly. Otherwise, if he wanted to attack, he would have to fight the Grand Elder directly. Chapter 11:22. The corner of Shangqing Skylord's mouth twitched. Suddenly, he snorted and waved his sleeves. He said in a deep voice, "Boy, it seems that you are not fated to have the immortal slaying sword formation." Lin Yuan's eyelids twitched. He said helplessly, "Senior, please don't try to provoke me. If I really kill Mosquito Daoran now, I dare not say that I have 100% chance of surviving the cultivation tribulation. However, if I plan it well, I have a 60% chance of surviving. Senior, do you have a great chance of surviving the cultivation tribulation?" Speaking of this, Lin Yuan paused and said with a faint smile, "In the same cataclysm, some people are easy to pass, and some people are sad. Just like when the deification ceremony was held, the Ren school and the Chan school targeted you. If you were in a different world and triggered another cataclysm, do you think those innocent people who were implicated will let you go?" Shangqing Skylord snorted again. However, he did not intend to continue the conversation. He looked like a rascal. There was only one chance to kill Mosquito Daoran. If he missed it, he would have to face the Grand Supreme directly in the future. For Tong Tian, a cultivation tribulation would only hurt him. However, if he were to face the Grand Supreme directly, it was not like a sage could not be killed. More importantly, the death of Daoist when in the hands of Lin Yuan and the death of Daoist when in his hands are two completely different concepts. The Grand Supreme had most likely guessed Hongjuan's plan. That was why he sent Mosquito Daoran to the Tianwu world. He wanted to eliminate the karma so that Tong Tian would not have an excuse to kill Mosquito Daoran. After eliminating the karma, no matter how shameless Tong Tian was, he would not bully a junior. Hongjun knew that the Grand Supreme had seen through his plan. However, he insisted on sending Mosquito Daoran to the cultivation tribulation. In fact, it was a gamble. He was betting that Tong Tian would find a way to kill Mosquito Daoran and set off the cultivation tribulation. As for Hongjuan's confidence, during the God Investiture tribulation, the Ren school and the Chan school joined forces to target the disciples of the Jie school. As the leader of the Jie school, the Tongtian sect leader cursed and even went to the battlefield himself, causing the entire Jie school to be destroyed. After putting aside the many schemes behind, the character of the Tongtian sect leader was very clear. For someone like sect leader Tongtian, even if he was not in the untainted world, he could still be used as a pawn by Taishang and Hongjun. Even if sect leader Tongtian knew about these schemes, he probably would not care. For him, it was completely acceptable to pay some price to avenge his disciple. Moreover, although Shangqing Tianzuan was not a sage, as one of the three corpses incarnations, his real strength was definitely in the realm of a real god. As one of the Sanqing sect masters, how many incense and offerings did sect leader Tongtian have? Just thinking about it was enough to make one's scalp numb. Moreover, sect leader Tongtian now controlled a world. Even if the cultivation tribulation really broke out in the Tianwu world, Shangqing Tianzuan could still withstand it. Cultivators, demonic beasts, they all deserved to die. No wonder there were no demonic beasts or cultivators in the world that was completely controlled by the heavenly Tao fragment in my previous life. Even if there were, it was a legend left behind from ancient times. A cold light flashed in Lin Yuan's eyes. When living beings came into the world, there would be karma. Whether it was good karma or bad karma, there would be a day when it would be repaid. The heavenly Tao's job was to use the power of fate to deal with these karma chains little by little. Under the condition that it would not cause a great disturbance, it would be eliminated. Even if an ordinary person lived a long life, it would not be more than 100 years. After 100 years, the gratitude and grudges would be erased. Naturally, there would not be much karma left behind, and it would not be such a big burden to the heavenly Tao. However, cultivators and demonic beasts were different. Even in a small world like the Tianwu world, cultivators could easily live up to 300 to 500 years on the path of cultivation. If they went too far, they would be like those great demonic beasts and cultivators, using the power of incense to prolong their lives. They could even reform their bodies after death and be resurrected. It was precisely because of this that the karmic chains were difficult to deal with. Once there was a mistake, it would directly set off a cultivation tribulation. Senior, please reconsider. Lin Yuan's eyes returned to calmness. Seeing that sect master Tongtian did not speak, Lin Yuan pondered for a moment. Then, he narrowed his eyes and said, Senior, you are unwilling to have karma with the Grand Supreme because you and the Grand Supreme are formed from the same chi. In addition, the Grand Supreme is now a saint of the Great Path. Senior, you boast that you may not lose to the Grand Supreme, but your chances of winning are not necessarily great. However, you are forcing me to do so today. Have you not thought that in the future, I may also become a saint of the Great Path? You, Shangqing Skylord's eyes moved. He was just about to mock Lin Yuan, but when he thought of Lin Yuan's deeds, he fell into a strange silence. The coming of a great era was a very mysterious thing. To give an example that sect master Tongtian himself knew, the opening of the Hongmeng heavens was a great era. At that time, a terrifying existence like the great god Pangu was born. At that time, in the Hongmeng chaos, there was not only one intelligent existence like the great god Pangu. The so-called 3,000 fiend gods were naturally more than 3,000. Among them, there was no lack of terrifying existences like Yang Mei and Shi Qin who had mastered the great Tao of space and the great Tao of time. But what was the result? The great god Pangu fought against 3,000 ancient fiend gods alone and won. He even took the remnant souls of the 3,000 fiend gods to refine the six-soul banner, an incomparably terrifying treasure. Although the six-soul banner would definitely devour the remnant souls of the 3,000 fiend gods, the six-soul banner could curse and kill 6 people at once. Even sages could not escape from it. One could imagine how terrifying this treasure was. They were all fiend gods born in the Hongmeng chaos. Why was the great god Pangu so much stronger than the other fiend gods? The great Tao of force was very strong. When one's strength was unleashed to the extreme, fate, time, and space could be shattered. However, this extreme also depended on the level of the opponent. If it was an adult fighting against a child, a punch would naturally have such an effect. However, which of the 3,000 fiend gods wasn't the manifestation of the sky demon's laws? The monsters that were born in the Grand Era were just so unreasonable. Now that the Tianwu world was about to be repaired, it could be said that a great era was about to arrive. Looking at the whole universe, the only existence that could be counted as a monster was the Black Jiao. What was even more terrifying was that the Black Jiao's sage path was right in front of them. Once the world was repaired, the Black Jiao could be said to have become a sage. He could directly control the netherworld and the underworld. At that time, the stronger the netherworld was, the stronger the Black Jiao would be. If it was someone else who told Tong Tian that the day of becoming a sage was just around the corner, Tong Tian would definitely spit on that person's face. However, when the Black Jiao said such words, although Tong Tian was not convinced, he could not find any basis to refute. Chapter 11:23. If that's the case, what do you think we should do with this? Shunxing Tianzuan thought that Lin Yuan was most likely a monster bred by the world and immediately softened his tone. However, his killing intent towards Mosquito Daoran did not disappear. Instead, it grew stronger. There was no other reason than pure hatred. What did Mosquito Daoran do to deserve this? He was just one of the 5 ferocious insects of primordial world. In terms of background, he was not even in the eyes of Shangqing Tianzuan. Even the golden cicada, one of the 5 ferocious insects of primordial world, could be subdued by the Western sect. Moreover, the one who subdued the golden cicada was the guide Daoist. Anyone who was familiar with the untainted land knew that the Western sect did not have the qualifications to become a sage. Even if they duped the Red Cloud Daoist and joined hands to snatch the demon master Qimping, the two of them had made many great ambitions to become one of the 6 sages of heaven. In that case, what was the difference between the blood-winged black mosquito, the 3rd of the 5 ferocious insects of primordial world, and an ant in the eyes of sect leader Tong Tian? However, Mosquito Daoran had a supreme who had become a Tao saint as his guarantor. Moreover, the future sage, Black Jiao, was not willing to kill Mosquito Daoran at this time. Rounding up, these 2 sages were bullying sect leader Tong Tian. What was the difference between this and the investiture of the gods' tribulation? Oh, there was. In the investiture of the gods' tribulation, the Chan sect, the Ren sect and the Western sect worked together to fight him. That person did this to trigger the Tianwu world's cultivation tribulation. His purpose is to kill you and me. After all, once the cultivation tribulation starts, the will of the world will definitely not let us off as the culprits. Now that we don't have the power of a sage, the possibility of us dying is naturally greatly increased. Taking a step back, even if we can withstand the cultivation tribulation, after the cultivation tribulation, we don't even have the power to resist the invasion of the untainted land. At that time, no matter what we are planning, it will all be in vain. Therefore, in my opinion, we can't kill Mosquito Daoran. At least, we can't kill him now. However, you don't have to wait for too long. Now that the heaven and earth restoration has become a general trend, any human or demon who tries to stop it will be crushed into pieces. Even without that person's plan, the cultivation tribulation will start anyway. At that time, won't Mosquito Daoran be at your mercy? For now, what we need to do is to accelerate the heaven and earth restoration as soon as possible. After the cultivation tribulation ends, you don't have to suppress your power. Mosquito Daoran can also be killed easily. We have left our trump cards behind. How we fight for it is our own business. However, if anyone from the untainted land wants to take a share of the pie, we can just kill them. Lin Yuan organized his words and quickly gave his suggestion. Starting the cultivation tribulation and participating in it were 2 different things. starting the cultivation tribulation and causing countless living beings to suffer the pain of the cultivation tribulation. If the karma chain smashed down, those below the sage realm would definitely die. However, participating in the cultivation tribulation was different. Whether or not they could survive would depend entirely on their own abilities. They wouldn't be targeted in any way. More importantly, once the heaven and earth restoration was completed, Lin Yuan could only say that the great Tao was within his reach. However, in fact, he could barely open the nether world and comprehend the Tao. He was almost at the level of a sage-to-be. Daoist Red Cloud and Lord Shangqing were probably able to burst out with the fighting strength of a sage-to-be. As for the sage realm, it did not exist. The middle world could not bear the power of a sage. Lin Yuan was not a kind person. He also wanted to know the secret of the heaven martial world. However, even in the small world, Lin Yuan might not be able to defeat Daoist Red Cloud and Lord Shangqing. Even if Hanba came, Lin Yuan could only run away, not to mention these two experts who were at the peak of the sage-to-be. It was impossible for him to snatch something from them. Reality was reality. This was not a game where one could start all over again. Every choice was dancing on the edge of a knife. If one was not careful, one would die. If Lin Yuan wanted to fight against these people, or in other words, if he wanted to officially participate in the struggle for the secret, he had to make up for the whole world. Moreover, he had to quickly control the netherworld, comprehend the Tao, and obtain the combat power of the sage-to-be level. Only then would Lin Yuan have the ability to participate in the struggle. Otherwise, let alone snatching the treasure, the others could easily kill him. Lord Shangqing squinted his eyes and looked at Lin Yuan carefully. Even an old man could become a demon, not to mention Tong Tian's sect master who had lived for countless years. Of course, he could see that Lin Yuan must have a plan when he made this proposal. However, what Lin Yuan said was indeed reasonable. After all, participating in the cultivation tribulation and starting it were two completely different difficulties. Tong Tian's sect master was not as powerful as Tong Tian's sect master, so he naturally avoided it. Secondly, although Lin Yuan's proposal was beneficial to him, if the heaven and earth restoration was not completed, the secret of the heaven would not be revealed. More importantly, no matter how powerful Black Jiao was, after the heaven and earth restoration, he would at most be in the sage-to-be realm. However, there was a gap between sage-to-be and sage-to-be. For example, the strength of the great ways they cultivated and the divine senses they mastered. Not to mention, in this middle world, the strength he could unleash was at least at the peak of the sage-to-be, which was completely different from that of a sage-to-be. Shangqing Tianzuan thought for a moment and said with a smile, Lin Yuan, although I don't know why you are so obsessed with this matter, you should know that whether it is me or Hong Yun, we all have a deep hatred for that person. And you are just an entrant. Is it worth it to gamble your life for that thing? This time, it was Lin Yuan who was silent. Fine. Shangqing Heavenly Lord smiled and turned around to walk away. He said indifferently, let's do as you say. I don't care how you think. However, you have to remember the words no regrets. Don't say that I didn't warn you. Seeing that Lord Shangqing had left, Lin Yuan's eyes narrowed. He took a deep breath and condensed the limitless ghost again. It wrapped up the space that had been sealed by the willow branches and disappeared without a trace. Then, he looked meaningfully at Generals Hang and Ha who were still suppressed by the soul-dispersing gourd. Then, he swung his tail and rushed toward the northern frontier. At this time, Generals Hang and Ha could see that it was not Lin Yuan who was fighting against them from the beginning. Then, there was no doubt who could control the soul-dispersing gourd. Even though Generals Hang and Ha had lived for countless years, they could not help but show despair on their faces. It was too difficult to beg for a way out from that person. Chapter 11:24. Outside the Great Wall of the Northern Frontier. Slaughter could be seen everywhere. The cavalry of the Shuangjin dynasty was battered and bruised under this Great Wall pass. After much difficulty, they finally broke through the pass. Before they could count the various resources and provisions they obtained, they heard a thunderous boom. Then, this seemingly indestructible pass collapsed, crushing and injuring countless warriors of the Frost Mirror grassland. Moreover, before they could dig out their comrades who were buried under the rubble, the northern frontier cavalry and the soldiers guarding the pass that they had beaten back came back again. Moreover, they relied on their superior equipment to push them back again. Humiliation. Absolute humiliation. The warriors of the Frost Mirror grassland had never lost a battle on the plains other than against demonic beasts. However, when they encountered the army of the northern frontier, it was as if they had met their nemesis. First, the light cavalry crashed into the enemy's heavy cavalry. When they finally gathered the Blood Liao cavalry and planned to fight the enemy head-on, the enemy suddenly played a trick and dealt them a heavy blow. The Blood Liao cavalry that was at the front were almost all caught in the explosion. Even if they weren't killed on the spot, they were buried under the rubble. As for the light cavalry that weren't seriously affected, when they saw the northern frontier dragon riders coming back, they didn't have the courage to charge at the enemy. They were either killed on the spot or found a chance to escape. However, the nightmare didn't end there. Because at the border between the northern frontier and the Frost Mirror grassland, a large number of soldiers wearing black armor and holding the Black Water flag appeared. They directly blocked the retreat of the Frost Mirror grassland cavalry. After several failed attempts to break out, the remaining Frost Mirror grassland cavalry gathered together again. At this moment, they felt like they were useless. They couldn't defeat the cavalry of the northern frontier in a head-on charge. In other words, there was no such thing as a head-on collision. The cavalry of the northern frontier just took out their crossbows and charged forward. Forget about charging forward, they would be lucky if they didn't get torn apart by the rain of arrows. When they finally saw the infantry of the northern frontier, they immediately became ferocious and started to charge. In the end, the Blackwater army was also equipped with those terrifying crossbows. Although they were not as extravagant as the cavalrymen, who each had a crossbow, there were still around a dozen crossbows in a troop of around 300 people. However, these crossbows could not achieve the same suppressive firepower as before. There were still some cavalrymen with superb horsemanship who charged into the enemy's formation. And then, it was ridiculous. Because their scimitars were supported by horsepower, zhenqi, or earth energy. With a single slash of their scimitars, even if they could not break mountains and crush rocks, they could seriously injure ordinary demonic beasts to the brink of death. However, when they slashed at the armor of the Blackwater army, they only left a shallow white mark. If it were a battle between mortals, good armor alone would have been useless. A single slash of a scimitar with horsepower would have caused a certain amount of damage even if it could not cut through the armor. It would have been very normal for the enemy to be sent flying. However, the Blackwater army was different. Every member of the Blackwater army was a cultivator, and even the weakest of them was at the advanced stage of the airborne realm. As long as the scimitars did not cut through their armor, the shock of the impact could be suppressed with a thought. At most, it would only cause them to be stunned for a moment. On the other hand, the cavalrymen who slashed at the enemy slowed down after failing to hit the enemy. Many of them were cut down by the Blackwater army. The cavalrymen could not defeat them. The infantry could not defeat them either. Was this a war? Was this a joke? They finally understood why the Shuangjin dynasty had split into two groups. Although the group that went into the central plains was badly damaged by the sky demon, there were still some who made it back alive. On the other hand, the frost warriors who went into the northern frontier were all wiped out. Even the 13th prince died in that battle. That was an all-around crushing defeat. It was not like what Shuangjin Khan had said before. It was because the number of cavalrymen who went into the northern frontier was even fewer. More importantly, the decision made by the Heavenly Khan, who claimed to be a famous general of the era, did not seem to be a problem at the time. After all, the wealth of the northern frontier was beyond their imagination. If there were such fearsome cavalrymen outside that pass, why couldn't there be similar deployments at the other passes? On the contrary, the Shuangjin dynasty turned around and hid their surprise troops, waiting for the cavalry of the northern frontier to come out and attack the pass. At that time, the northern frontier would have to either give up the pass and give up on the 30,000 cavalrymen outside, or lose the pass and die. If the northern frontier had chosen the former, they would have only been able to stall for a few days before dying. On the other hand, the armor and crossbows that the Shuangjin dynasty obtained after wiping out the 30,000 cavalrymen would have been able to instantly boost the military strength of the Shuangjin dynasty to a whole new level. But what happened in the end? The Shuangjin dynasty did not choose either option at the northern frontier. The 30,000 cavalrymen and the 50,000 soldiers guarding the pass simply avoided the battle and waited for the Shuangjin dynasty to attack. The Shuangjin dynasty had foolishly fought their way in and fell into the second trap of the northern frontier. In one battle, the Shuangjin dynasty had lost the Shuangjin dynasty's pride, the Shuangjin dynasty's Blackwater army. But that was not the end. The Shuangjin dynasty had never expected that the northern frontier's Blackwater army would not be stationed at the other passes. Instead, the Shuangjin dynasty's army had set off from the route that they had abandoned and circled behind them, cutting off their escape route. Now, the Shuangjin dynasty's army was squeezed together and no one could find a way out. If there were people who came from the same world as Lin Yuan, it would be easy to see that the strategy adopted by Lin Yuan in this battle was similar to the first battle of Emperor Wu of Han against the Xiongnu people, which made countless people sigh and sigh because the officials were greedy and afraid of death and leaked the secret, which led to the failure of the plan. Mai's plot. A failed plan, but it was the origin of the war between Emperor Wu and the Xiongnu. Tracing back to this period of history, anyone with a discerning eye could see how amazing Emperor Wu's strategy was. Since ancient times, farming civilizations and nomadic civilizations had been in constant conflict. Even during the reign of King Zhou of Shang, the Shang dynasty and these barbarians could be said to be irreconcilable. But there were three problems that had to be solved in the war between farming and nomadic civilizations. First, they could not win. Second, they could not find them. Third, it was not worth it. First, how did Emperor Wu deal with it? He used the wealth that Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing had accumulated during their recuperation to open horse ranches among the people. He obtained a large number of warhorses and crossbows to train elite cavalrymen. During the war between Emperor Wu and the Xiongnu, the wealth that Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing had accumulated, as well as the taxes that Emperor Wu had collected, were all used up. That was why he was known to be militaristic. But in reality, the Han dynasty had been forced by the Xiongnu to ask for all kinds of money, technology, and princesses. Emperor Wu had launched an all-out war against the Xiongnu. He had even almost wiped out the Xiongnu. Chapter 11:25. After solving the problem of not being able to win, Emperor Wu changed his weak attitude towards Empress Dowager Do and took the initiative to declare war on the Xiongnu. At the same time, he displayed his military talent, the Mai stratagem. Emperor Wu's attitude was very clear. The grasslands were very big, and he could not find you. However, he had to beat you, so he would let you beat him. Therefore, Emperor Wu lured the Xiongnu to invade Han territory and set the location of the final battle at Mai. To put it bluntly, if not for Emperor Wu's inexperience at the time and his lack of consideration of the problem, such as the military official Chen Yu entering Han territory and seeing a herd of cows and sheep without any herders, he would not have become suspicious. If he did not become suspicious, he would not have captured the Han officials. If that Yanmen commandant had risked his life for the sake of the country instead of revealing the Mai stratagem to the military official Chen Yu, then in this battle, Lu Che would have been able to defeat the Xiongnu and there would not have been a full-scale war. If this battle had been successful, the Xiongnu would not have the capital to fight against the Han dynasty. Because in the following series of battles, the Han dynasty would have single-handedly suppressed the Xiongnu. The phrase, "the merciful do not command an army," was absolutely appropriate for Liu Che at this time. Of course, this kind of low-level mistake was a mistake that only a newbie would make. If Emperor Wu of Han had planned this battle, not to mention the military official Chanyu, even if all the Chanyu of the Xiongnu were added together, they would only be toyed around in the palm of Liu Che's hand. It was still the same saying, reality was reality. It was not a game that could be replayed after losing. Emperor Wu of Han paid the price for his mistake, which was the 44 years of all-out war between Han and Xiongnu. And this was only because of Emperor Wu's military talent, because the third factor was the most important. This was also the reason why Emperor Wu of Han was able to unite the Han dynasty under Empress Dowager Dou's control and fight against the Xiongnu for his passion and unyielding spirit. During the Han-Xiong War, Liu Che opened up the western regions and established the famous Silk Road. Moreover, it was not like Qin Shi Huang who conquered the Six Kingdoms. He used more than 40 years to integrate the western regions into the Yan Huang Empire. At that time, all the countries in the western regions thought that they were part of the Great Han, even after the fall of the Western Han. This was because after the Eastern Han was established, the western regions quickly returned to the embrace of the Great Han. Many people thought that this was because the countries in the western regions were afraid of the Great Han's iron cavalry. Although this was a factor, it was more because Liu Che unified the culture and ideology of the countries in the western regions, making them feel that they were part of the Great Han from the bottom of their hearts. Even during the Three Kingdoms period at the end of the Eastern Han, Boss Chao unified the western regions more easily than he unified the Central Plains. Not only that, Emperor Wu of Han also reclaimed the Heshi corridor and turned it into a horse racing ground for the Han dynasty. This was the reason why the Great Han dynasty's cavalry could dominate the world. Even in the world's hegemony at that time, only the noble Frost cavalry could compete with the Great Han dynasty's cavalry. However, the noble Frost Empire was originally a nomadic civilization, a people on horseback. From this, one could see how strong the Great Han dynasty's cavalry was. After solving the three problems that had to be solved in the war between an agricultural civilization and a nomadic civilization, it was the legendary life of Emperor Wu of Han. From the historical records, Emperor Wu of Han fought with the Xiongnu for 44 years. The territory expanded nearly doubled, but the population only decreased by 10%. This was also due to the fact that the landlords annexed the land and population. He also conquered the western region, opened up the Silk Road, and laid a solid foundation for the Yan Huang dynasty to become the Celestial Empire. Such a great emperor, even with Lin Yuan's current knowledge, could not help but be called a king of men. However, he was scolded for being militaristic for so many years. There were also people who compared Li Shimin, who was fooled by the Confucian sect and wrote the imperial norms, which was a shameful work for human kings, to Liu Che. They even felt that Li Shimin should be the greatest emperor of all time, surpassing the Qin emperor and Emperor Wu of Han. However, if one did not look at the Song dynasty scholars who forcefully flattered the Li Tang dynasty in order to cover up Wu Zetian's achievements, Li Shimin could only barely reach a passing level among the human kings. Not to mention the so-called greatest emperor of all time, even the word great did not have anything to do with him. Another person who was praised as the Kaiyuan era, Li Longji. The biggest mistake in his life was that he died too late. His era was left behind by Wu Zetian. He would not be able to clean it up completely. After all, although Wu Zetian was the only empress and was criticized by others, if one understood the history, one would realize that this empress' achievements were only inferior to Qin Shi Huang and Ning Zheng. During the Wu Zhou dynasty, there were 26 kingdom wars and 21 victories. She even started the so-called Great Asian War. She used the strength of a single country to fight the 5 major countries of Asia. There were as many as 15 countries that participated in the war. As for Wu Zetian, she won 5 out of 5 battles and was called the top of the world. The other countries worked together to build a Wuzhou Tianshu for her. At that time, all the kings of the various countries left their names on the Wuzhou Tianshu. Wuzhou was the strongest country in the world. It was comparable to the pillars of Ashoka and Trajan's achievement pillar. It was even taller than the other two achievement pillars. What was more terrifying was that the Wuzhou dynasty did not spend a single cent to build the Wuzhou Tianshu. It was built by the surrounding countries spontaneously. And then, it was pushed down by Li Longji. More than 130 countries were so angry that they broke off relations with the Tang dynasty. Under the defamation of the Confucian sect, who claimed that they were connected to the heavens and were bestowed by the gods, but did not do it themselves and instead asked others to abide by the heavens and extinguish human desires, people like Qin Shi Huang, Han Wu, Sui Yang, and Wu Jiong, who had no qualms about Yan Huang and human kings, were all defamed miserably. Lin Yuan's war against the Shuangjin dynasty was based on Emperor Wu of Han's Mai strategy. He had never denied the terror of these cavalrymen on the grasslands. Even if they could not defeat the army of the northern region head-on, they could still make use of the mobility of cavalry to harass, attack, and even cut off the northern region's supplies, causing the northern region's army to be exhausted on the grasslands. That was why Lin Yuan would not take the initiative to attack the Frost Mirror Plains. It was not the right time. However, that did not stop him from copying homework. It was fine that the Tianwu world did not have a terrain like Mai. When Lin Yuan was building the Great Wall, he had already prepared this pass. He wanted to create an artificial Mai for the Shuangjin dynasty to use as a battlefield to kill them. As for the quality of the northern frontier army, it was not a problem that they could not defeat the Shuangjin dynasty. It was only a matter of whether they were easy to defeat or not. Furthermore, Lin Yuan had learned from the experience of the human kings in his previous life. He first cleaned up the sects and aristocratic families. Only then did he plan to deal with the neighboring Shuangjin dynasty. Chapter 1126. Without the intervention of the aristocratic families and sects, Lin Yuan had the final say in the northern frontier. The Sky Demon, who had previously hindered Lin Yuan, had also lost contact with the Nether River Patriarch because the Patriarch of Yangmei was guarding outside the heavenly gates. Thus, he had become a wandering ghost and was unable to affect the northern frontier. This could be considered as helping Lin Yuan to get rid of a major problem. In addition, Lei Fan, Su Yan, Luo Su, and the others had been exposed one after another. Under Li Axian's investigation, the Northern Restoration Society was also in a worse state day by day. It could be said that there were no internal and external troubles. Now, he had also settled the relationship with the Hingduan mountain range. The decision-makers of the Chuyuan dynasty had been wiped out and the demon venerable of the southern wasteland had been severely injured. Furthermore, these two parties were now hated by the Hingduan mountain range. In a short period of time, they would not be able to affect the northern frontier. As for the Qingjiang dynasty, it was simply trembling in fear in this revolution that anyone with a discerning eye could see. After all, the dragon clan of the four seas behind them was still being suppressed by the demonic beasts of the outer sea. How would they have the time to care about them? At this time, it was obviously unrealistic for them to provoke the northern frontier. There were no internal and external troubles. Wouldn't they jump up and violently knock on the heads of these reckless barbarians in the Frost Mirror grassland? Therefore, the magically modified version of the Mai plot began to show its power under Lin Yuan's plan. The main forces of the Shuangjin dynasty were first badly battered at the pass. Then, when the Blackwater army cleaned up the immortals and entered a state of encirclement through various transmission formations, the fate of these Shuangjin barbarian was already decided. Lin Yuan did not need to consider the problem of whether he could defeat them or not. In fact, when the northern frontier was in a state where he had the final say, Lin Yuan did not need to consider the problem of whether it was worth it or not. However, such a matter could not be done this way. Now, those who gathered under Lin Yuan, In addition to the original people of the northern frontier and the immigrants of the Shinwu dynasty, there were also a large number of people who felt that they had some ability and wanted to fight for a future in the northern frontier. Otherwise, in 3 years of continuous battles, Lin Yuan was not a god. How could he ensure that the population under his rule was always in a state of growth? These people who gathered from various places to the northern frontier, after several rounds of screening, most of the people who were just there to make up the numbers were eliminated. The remaining people more or less had some ability. Whether it was going on a campaign or governing a place, there were some good seedlings. Although the northern frontier could not attract any sects to rely on, it was not inferior to sects and aristocratic families. Their cultivation realm might be low, but their ability was absolutely well developed. It should be known that the existence of a sect, unless it was supported by a particularly powerful sect headquarters, was composed of a few or a dozen aristocratic families. The so-called operating model of a sect was to select the talented children of these aristocratic families and send them to the sect to cultivate peacefully, providing the aristocratic families with protection in terms of martial strength. The resources needed for the operation of the sect were completely provided by these aristocratic families. Otherwise, Lin Yuan would not have said before that the sect should disintegrate into aristocratic families and enter the northern frontier. It should be known that even if the children of poor families or the lowest grassroots were really talented, there were very few who could enter a sect. Most of them would stop at being handymen. Those who could be selected as outer core disciples were already at the level of dragons and phoenixes among men. Therefore, it was basically impossible for a sect like the one in fantasy novels to exist. From a logical level of thinking, if it was not formed by a group of powerful aristocratic families, then it would be impossible to gather the resources needed to operate a sect. If you wanted to snatch the rice bowl of others, you would need to have the ability to do so, right? A group of unrelated people mixed together was not called a sect. It was called a gang, a mountain stronghold, or a guild. Strictly speaking, they belonged to the forest. But a sect was different. A sect was a real aristocratic identity. When the disciples of some powerful sects went to a place, even the local officials had to give them some face. But who had ever seen the officials give face to those local ruffians? After eliminating the idea of the aristocratic families being scattered to various places and allowing these aristocratic families to form sects to protect places, Li Zhong held the military and political power of the northern frontier firmly in his hands. The remaining aristocratic families, whether strong or weak, could only cooperate with the northern frontier. It was not a peaceful time now. Without the protection of martial strength, you would not even know how you died. But a high degree of centralization of power was not necessarily a good thing. For example, right now, the number of talents from all walks of life in the northern frontier had reached a saturation point. If it were not for the internship system, the northern frontier would have long since become redundant. Moreover, as talents from all over the world gathered at the northern frontier, the students of the Northern Frontier Academy graduated according to their qualifications. This was indeed a headache for Li Zhong. Therefore, expansion had become the most important thing. Sky Demon was not easy to deal with. Or it could be said that this group of bastards were like cows in sheep's clothing. They could be dealt with, but they were very difficult to eradicate. Therefore, they had to be dealt with last by Lin Yuan. At the very least, he had to form a team specifically to deal with Sky Demon. Therefore, there were not many options for Lin Yuan to choose from. Northern Frontier Prince's Mansion. Lin Yuan and Li Zhong looked at each other for a moment. Li Zhongzai squinted his eyes slightly and said in a deep voice, "Lord Dragon King, I don't really understand your plan. Expansion is an urgent matter for the northern region, but we can obviously choose a better plan, such as reclaiming the other territories of the Shinwu dynasty. First of all, we are in the right in terms of the law, so no one will be afraid of us. Second of all, we will have to deal with the otherworldly demons sooner or later, so it doesn't make much difference if we do it sooner or later. Why don't we take advantage of the fact that they have lost their command and launch a large-scale attack? He paused and added, of course, we are very clear about the trouble that Sky Demon is in. Even if we don't deal with Sky Demon now, we can still choose to attack the Xinjiang Empire. If we go through the Hingduan Mountains, we can directly ignore their river defense line. If we fight on land, let alone the northern frontier, any one of the empires can directly beat them up. So, what is your suggestion? Lin Yuan blinked and looked at Li Zhong playfully. The Chuyun Empire. Li Zhong's face darkened as he said sternly. Seeing that Lin Yuan did not speak, Li Zhong quickly added, the Xinjiang Empire is no match for us. Therefore, if we request to pass through, they will not ignore us. Moreover, the Chuyun Empire has shown goodwill to us and ceded a large territory to us. It is reasonable for us to attack and occupy the Chuyun Empire's territory now. Why do I have such a stupid brother? Li Axayan, who was wearing a silver flying fish robe and a black cloak, stopped standing at the side to act as a guard. He glanced at Li Zhong with disdain, then his face was filled with disappointment. Chapter 11:27. I'm stupid. Li Zhong's expression changed. He growled, what do you know? You better manage your Imperial Secret Service. Don't tell them what to do. Li Axayan sneered and turned his head to the side. It seemed like he couldn't be bothered to debate with Li Zhong. Li Zhong turned his head back and said, Your Majesty, I'm speaking from the bottom of my heart. The Frost Mirror grassland is of little value to us. First of all, the climate of the Frost Mirror grassland is changeable. During the day, it can steam people to death, and at night, the wind can freeze people into ice sculptures. There are poisonous insects and swamps everywhere. Moreover, it is impossible to build a city because the terrain of the grassland is constantly changing. Some places may be solid soil today, but the next day, they will be washed into swamps by the water. Some places may dry up from wetlands and become habitable. If we build a city, I'm afraid that it will collapse before the city is built. Who said I'm going to build a city on the grassland? Lin Yuan was slightly startled. He looked at Li Zhong helplessly. Li Zhong wasn't stupid. On the contrary, he was very smart. He could handle all kinds of government affairs in the northern frontier with ease. Even if he was involved in some unfamiliar areas, he could quickly grasp them and make the most beneficial decisions for the northern frontier. However, he was too steady, so steady that it was frightening. What kind of brain circuit did he have to think of building a city on the grassland? If a city could be built on the grassland, what would be the point of those nomadic civilizations? Besides, the northern frontier's gathering place wasn't built like a city. The relationship between the northern frontier and the Hingduan mountain range had always been good. Those monsters wouldn't rashly attack the northern frontier. Under such circumstances, the northern frontier didn't need a city wall to protect the gathering place at all. The northern frontier's army wouldn't be afraid of anyone in the field. Even if it was a monster, the northern frontier's army would bite off a piece of flesh. The reason why he built the northern frontier's Great Wall wasn't because he couldn't defeat the Frost Mirror Barbarian in the field, but because the Frost Mirror Barbarian's mobility was still there. No one could ignore it. In addition, the northern frontier didn't have a city wall. Once they bypassed the northern frontier's army, it would be a disaster for the ordinary people living in the northern frontier. Lord Dragon King, I know that the northern frontier doesn't build a city wall, but you should also know that the grassland and the northern frontier can't be compared. The northern frontier's geographical environment is like mountains and rivers. Even if there aren't any conspicuous cities, people won't get lost. However, the grassland is an endless expanse of green grass mixed with a large number of wetlands that can't be walked on. The climate is also extremely bad. It's very difficult to cross the grassland without preparation. Even if you have a map, it's easy to get lost. What's more terrifying is that once you get lost in the grassland, you'll basically starve to death, freeze to death, or even be poisoned to death by those poisonous insects. Unless you're extremely lucky, you'll die before you find the tribes on the grassland. If you still maintain the policy of the northern frontier and don't build cities on the grassland, unless you're willing to pay a huge price to train people who are familiar with the grassland's terrain and prepare guides for every team that goes to the grassland will be a land of death for us. Li Zhong took a deep breath and felt a slight pain in his temples. He said, "You know the financial situation of the northern frontier. The tax rate can be said to be extremely low. It's already good enough that it can barely operate. The research and construction of the Ministry of Works are all relying on the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Now that the northern frontier needs to feed more and more people, the market is becoming more and more saturated. Our financial problems have to be solved. Before that, I absolutely won't agree to you continuing to expand your expenditure. That's why I said you're stupid." Li Axan crossed his arms in front of his chest and sneered again. Seeing that Lin Yuan didn't speak and being provoked by Li Axan again and again, Li Zhong suddenly slammed the table and stood up, roaring angrily, "I told you to shut up. Don't you get it? You want me to cut the Imperial Secret Service's budget by half in the second half of the year, and you'll be happy, right? Ha!" Li Axan sneered, squinted his eyes, and said, "It's a waste to choose you as the king of the northern frontier. You're good at defending, but not good at attacking. Can't you look further? For example, what if the Dragon King's goal isn't the Frost Mirror grassland but to use it as a springboard to attack the Deadwood dynasty? If you rethink your plan, the situation will still be the same, and the Frost Mirror grassland will be useless, right?" Li Zhong was choked by Li Axan's words, but he didn't refute immediately. Instead, he simulated the map in his mind and then opened his eyes to look at Li Axan. He licked his lips and was speechless for a moment. What kind of F***king brain is this? We haven't even conquered the Frost Mirror grassland, and we're already thinking about attacking the Deadwood dynasty. After waiting for a while, seeing that Lin Yuan didn't say anything, Li Zhong turned to look at Lin Yuan blankly and said in a deep voice, You can't really think like that, right? Lord Dragon King, The Frost Mirror grassland isn't useless. I have other uses for this region, but Li Axan is right. I want to use the Frost Mirror grassland as a springboard to attack the Deadwood dynasty. This is our next phase of the strategic deployment." The corners of Lin Yuan's mouth opened, revealing a ferocious smile. After being hit by Lin Yuan, Li Zhong immediately leaned back. His eyes were filled with shock. "That's why I said you're really stupid. Why don't you think about it? There are so many people in the Frost Mirror grassland. Why don't we accept these people to contribute to the northern frontier when we have an absolute victory? Why do we let the Hengduan mountain range's demon beasts run amok in the Frost Mirror grassland while we attract the Shuangjin dynasty's main forces?" Li Axan looked at Li Zhong with a grin and said with a hideous smile, "Since the Dragon King made this deployment, he never wanted to take the Frost Mirror grassland, let alone leave those barbarians alive. Think about it. After some time, when the news of the Frost Mirror grassland's main forces being wiped out reaches the grassland, and the Hengduan mountain range's demon beasts are slaughtering the barbarians, where will those Shuangjin barbarian go?" Gulp. Li Zhong swallowed his saliva. His face was a little pale, as if he was frightened by the speculation in his heart. The sudden attack of the Hengduan mountain range's demon beasts will definitely catch the Shuangjin barbarian off guard. At that time, what they will have to do is to resist the slaughter of the demon beasts. However, don't forget that the Dragon King promised those demon beasts that the demon beast tide attacking the Frost Mirror grassland this time will not be the small fries in the periphery. Every clan will send out their elites. With the remaining strength of those tribes, they will definitely not be able to contend against these demon beasts. Therefore, they can only escape. To the north is the Hengduan mountain range, to the south is the area controlled by the Sky Demon, and to the west is our northern frontier. They definitely won't dare to go to these three places. Therefore, they can only escape. Li Axan still had a hideous smile on his face. Chapter 1128. Li Zhong pondered for a moment and realized that was indeed the case. He was not an argumentative person. As long as there was no problem with logic, he would not ask questions like, "Why are you so sure?" Since the northern frontier was established, the Shuangjin dynasty had fought 2 wars with the northern frontier. In both wars, the Shuangjin dynasty was the one that was annihilated. Therefore, no matter how bold the Shuangjin dynasty barbarians were, they would not continue to flee to the northern frontier when they had nowhere else to go. To them, it was a path of certain death. The Great Wall of the Northern Territory wasn't just for show. It was a defensive facility that even their main army and regular army couldn't defend against. If the Northern Territory decided to shut itself in, they could only wait for their deaths at the foot of the Great Wall of the Northern Territory. That was why it was better for them to run to the Witherwood dynasty from the start. Intelligent life forms all sought advantages and avoided disadvantages. This was an indisputable fact. The Shuangjin dynasty had never won a battle against the northern frontier. The Shuangjin dynasty had never lost a battle against the Witherwood dynasty. Or rather, it could not be said that they had never lost a battle. After all, the Shuangjin barbarian would invade the borders every year, just like how they had to deal with the beast tide every year. The Shuangjin barbarian did not care at all. The things that the Shuangjin barbarian stole every year were not even enough to cover the cost of dispatching an army. Therefore, they turned a blind eye to it. However, at this time, it was a clear psychological hint. Only death awaited them if they went to the northern frontier, but there was still a chance of survival if they went to the Witherwood dynasty. Therefore, a large number of Shuangjin barbarian would definitely swarm into the Witherwood dynasty, and they would be able to reach the Frost Mirror grassland in an instant. The Witherwood dynasty would not ignore these exiled Shuangjin barbarian either. After all, the 2 sides were mortal enemies. It was fine if it was a small-scale Shuangjin barbarian, but if so many Shuangjin barbarians suddenly swarm in, the Witherwood dynasty would have to be crazy not to exterminate them. At this time, the army of the northern frontier was marching toward the Frost Mirror grassland. They could still use the excuse of exterminating the demon beasts. In addition, Lin Yuan had negotiated with the Hingduan Mountains. The army of the northern frontier could be said to be unstoppable. Even if they ran into a demon beast army, the army of the northern frontier would most likely avoid them. The army of the Shuangjin dynasty was not fighting the Shuangjin barbarian. No demon beast clan dared to send their elites to clash with the army of the northern frontier, especially at this juncture where the demon beast master selection was taking place. Once the army of the northern frontier passed through the Frost Mirror grassland, the rest of the story was very simple. Faced with the tight defensive line of the Witherwood dynasty, even if the army of the northern frontier could penetrate it, they would have to pay a heavy price. However, in reality, in order to surround and intercept the Shuangjin barbarian, the army of the Witherwood dynasty would definitely mobilize most of the troops to guard the border. After all, they would never expect the northern frontier to attack them. Penetrating such a defensive line was a piece of cake for the army of the northern frontier. After passing through the border that was easy to defend and difficult to attack, they would be like tigers entering a flock of sheep. They would be able to devour large amounts of territory in the blink of an eye. Not only would they be able to generate a huge amount of income for the northern frontier, but they would also be able to solve the employment problem of a considerable portion of the talents on the northern frontier. Li Zhong rubbed his forehead and said in disbelief, "I understand the logic, but why the Witherwood dynasty?" After all, there was no reason to attack a dynasty. What was the difference between the Azure River dynasty and the Witherwood dynasty? On the other hand, attacking the Witherwood dynasty might seem easy, but in reality, it would lengthen the battle line of the northern frontier. It was very likely that it would be difficult to take care of both the front and the rear. This would undoubtedly increase the difficulty of the battle for supremacy on the northern frontier. Are you stupid? Are you stupid? Tell me, are you stupid? Li Axan sneered with a mocking expression on his face. That's enough. Can you show some respect to your elder brother? Li Zhong slammed his hand on the stone table in front of him again. He looked like he was about to have a brain hemorrhage. I'm just speaking the truth. First, you have to be clear about one thing. The 7 great empires have occupied the Sky Martial continent for close to 10,000 years. Even if we exclude the Guardian of the Gate of Heaven and the other hidden powers, in these 10,000 years, the 7 great empires will have produced countless shocking geniuses. With the accumulation of this foundation, it will be an extremely terrifying force. I've traveled around the 7 empires in the past, learning various knowledge and experiencing various occupations, so my understanding of the 7 empires far surpasses your elder brother who only knows how to read books. I can even guarantee that once the 7 empires are united, even the Heaven's Gate protectors will have no choice but to avoid them, let alone the northern frontier that has been established for less than 3 years. Of course, if our Dragon King is willing to be a puppet and allow the aristocratic families, sects, various guilds, and chambers of commerce to grow, then the 7 empires will naturally not be united. The ones who will deal with us will be the aristocratic families of the 7 empires, the relatives of the royal family, and the armies they control. As long as it's not an all-out war, our northern frontier will not be weak in a one-on-one battle. But the problem is, in the Dragon King's ruling style, there has never been a place for sections. Even the aristocratic families have to obediently abide by the rules set by the northern frontier to exist. Once they break the rules, it will be a disaster. Not to mention the existence of those guilds and chambers of commerce. None of them will be able to surpass the association of the Demon Emperor and the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce when they're in power in the northern frontier. So if they're left alone, there will only be 2 results. Either they disband on the spot, or they'll be eaten up by the northern frontier. In such a situation, the northern frontier will not only have to face the ruling class of an empire, but also the entire world. Li Axayan put his hands behind his back with an arrogant look on his face. He grinned and said, however, our Dragon King has cleverly made use of one thing, which is the inertia of history. In other words, in the Dragon King's plan, our threat must be the least. Wasn't this bullshit? Li Zhong really wanted to spit at Li Axayan's face. The northern frontier's threat level was small. How King small could it be? Anyone who wasn't an idiot would know that the structure of the 7 empires in the Tianwu continent was already set in stone. However, after the northern frontier began to grow wild, this structure was broken. When the Xinwu dynasty was still in existence, the northern frontier had already shown its prowess. They even openly sent troops to occupy the north, standing against the Xinwu dynasty across the Wei River. Now, they were indifferent to the land occupied by the Sky Demon, and they were attacking the Frost Mirror grassland. This clearly broke the rules and informed the other empires that the unchanging structure had changed. From now on, all the powers would enter a stage of reshuffling. And why would the northern frontier, who had broken all this, become the least threatening of all the independent powers? Chapter 1129. At this time, you must be thinking that the one who broke the rules was the northern frontier, so no matter how many ambitious people jump out, the northern frontier will inevitably become the target of public criticism. Why would the northern frontier become the one with the least threat in this chaotic world? Li Axayan looked as if he had the pearl of wisdom in his hands. He glanced at Li Zhong's unsightly expression and continued, "This is a strategy that you have never been involved in, so you can't understand. I call it, constraining oneself." Li Zhong was speechless. After a short pause in his brain, Li Zhong's expression suddenly changed, revealing a hint of shock. The situation of the 7 great empires dividing the Tianwu continent had not changed for nearly 10,000 years, but this did not mean that the 7 great empires had always carried out the transfer of power smoothly. There was no lack of vassal kings entering the capital to seize power, and powerful officials ascending to the throne to rule the world. However, no one had done it as thoroughly as Lei Qiuxing, even changing the name of the dynasty, turning the original Wanjian dynasty into the Xinwu dynasty. In fact, the imperial family did not change, but the change in power was just a game between the imperial family, the aristocratic families, and the sections. The so-called imperial family was the most powerful aristocratic family in the world. When a family or sect's strength surpassed the imperial families, they would naturally be able to control the power. However, as the imperial family's strength increased, or the strength of other powerful officials increased, the power would quickly fall to someone else. This was also a way for the imperial family to pacify the various factions. However, the northern frontier obviously would not play this game. Li Zhong glanced at Lin Yuan beside him, and an obscure light flashed in his eyes. He could see that his immediate superior did not respect divine authority. It could even be said that he was rather disgusted with the idea of divine authority. Furthermore, some of the ideas could not be said to be bad, but compared to the two sets of laws of the other empires, the new laws of the northern frontier were obviously too mild. This did not conform to the idea of using heavy laws in troubled times. However, he would not directly bring it up. Because as of now, there was not much problem in the northern frontier. Although everyone, including Lin Yuan himself, did not like the idea of divine authority, compared to those miscellaneous methods, the current northern frontier was more stable. Especially after the bloody examples of the previous two northern frontier kings and a series of northern frontier elders, everyone knew who to listen to in the northern frontier. Most of the time, what seemed to be a sure-win situation was not really a sure-win situation. Even when you thought you were going to make a killing move, the other party could simply block you to the side, or even counterattack you. Naturally, there was no need to mention the aspect of governance. The Shifter Emperor Association had the authority to directly report to the Dragon King, and no one dared to do anything under the supervision of the Shifter Emperor Association. Furthermore, with the embroidered uniform guards supervising the officials at all levels, especially under the control of Li Xian, such supervision was not as simple as just official matters. Even what some officials said or ate when they returned home would be recorded by the embroidered uniform guards hidden in the dark. Regarding this, Li Xian also had a very reasonable explanation. After all, Luo Su and the previous batch of people under the protection of the embroidered uniform guards had carried out these shady activities in private. As long as they had a clear conscience, why would they resist the supervision of the embroidered uniform guards? However, after leaving these links, the current situation in the northern frontier was no longer something that Li Zhong could control. He was indeed not very good at military matters, and he also knew his own limits, so he would not casually give orders. However, when this strategy of restricting oneself was placed in front of him, Li Zhong could not help but hold his breath. The northern frontier currently had the qualifications to occupy all of the Shenwu dynasty's territory in name. Even if there were post-war reconstruction, recuperation, and other projects that needed to be done, for the current Tianwu continent that was close to saturation, this was not a big problem. There were people who could not survive in their birthplace, or people who could not make use of their strengths due to the saturation of resources, and were waiting to migrate to the northern frontier. More importantly, there were no sects in the northern frontier. The Shifter Emperor Association and the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce had also been cleansed, and those aristocratic families were now extremely obedient. There was no such thing as land annexation or keeping private slaves. Furthermore, all the land was nationalized. Even if the northern frontier set a ridiculously low tax rate, the combined income was enough to hang up the imperial courts of the other empires. The potential of the northern region was there for all to see. This was something that almost everyone knew. However, Lin Yuan and Li Xian's confidence had forced Li Zhong to think about this strategy carefully. After thinking about it carefully for a moment, he really understood something. Why the Withered Wood Empire? The Frost Mirror grassland was in between the two. To any farming civilization, the Frost Mirror grassland was of little value. Unless it was the Frost Mirror barbarians who were used to living in the grassland, the people of the other empires who migrated to the Frost Mirror grassland would not be able to acclimatize. Therefore, the frost mirror grassland was of little value to the northern frontier, especially since they could only be nomads and could not produce any important resources. Not to mention that there was not much land suitable for farming, there was simply no land suitable for farming. In the past, the Shuangjin dynasty would only eat meat like demonic beasts. They would only trade with the caravans of other empires if their bodies could not take it anymore. All kinds of crops were sold to the Shuangjin dynasty at sky-high prices. Therefore, Li Zhong did not know what use the frost mirror grassland would be to Lin Yuan for the time being. He only knew that if Lin Yuan handed the frost mirror grassland to him, it would be a complete mess. What was even more terrifying was that the Withered Wood Empire was the complete opposite of the northern frontier's governing philosophy. The Withered Wood Empire's royal family was originally from a sect. They established their country through martial arts and dominated the world. They were invincible in the Withered Wood Empire. After establishing their country, they began to cultivate sects and the clans under them. Instead of saying that the Withered Wood Empire was an imperial court, it was more accurate to say that they were the most powerful sect in the Withered Wood Empire. It was evident how difficult it was for the northern frontier to conquer the Withered Wood Empire and implement the governing philosophy of the northern frontier. Li Zhong thought about it carefully. If he did not find anything wrong, he might not be able to see the Withered Wood Empire completely become a territory of the northern frontier even if he served for the rest of his life as the king of the northern frontier. If he did not attack the Chuyun Empire, the Qingjung Empire, and the Shenwu dynasty did not want to take over the Frost Mirror grassland, then use it as a springboard to attack the Withered Wood Empire, which had no conflict with the northern frontier but just could not get along with. Such an action was almost perfectly avoiding all the correct answers. Chapter 1130. However, the problem was that Lin Yuan and Li Axian were obviously not fools. Both of them were very optimistic about this strategy. Didn't that mean, I'm the fool? TSK. Li Zhong's expression immediately became awkward. However, if he thought about it from another perspective, the choice of policy almost determined the fate of an empire. This time was no exception. The destruction of the Shuangjin dynasty could be said to be certain. Under such circumstances, no matter what Lin Yuan did, he would break the situation of the seven empires segregating the Tianwu continent. It had to be said that after this terrifying and hateful incident, many ambitious people would emerge from the various empires, wanting to show off their strength. After all, the Shenwu dynasty was a very strange place. First, Lei Chuxing appeared and accomplished the impossible, overthrowing the Wangjian dynasty's rule and becoming the new nobleman of the seven empires. Then, in less than 100 years, the northern frontier's Black Zhao appeared. When these two unrelated incidents were put together, it was enough for those ambitious people to see the decay and decline of the empires. Moreover, there was Lei Chuxing and Lin Yuan. They perfectly proved that imperial power was not unshakable. As long as one had enough strength, anyone could create a new empire. Therefore, an extremely terrifying chaotic world was about to be set off. Then, the question was, who would be the thorn in the side in this chaotic world? What about the thorn in the side? It would undoubtedly be the northern frontier that broke the rules. Therefore, Li Zhong could say with certainty that once the northern frontier took over the Qingjung dynasty or the Chuyun dynasty's territory, the northern frontier would quickly become the target of public criticism. Regardless of whether it was a chaotic world or not, the other empires would join forces to attack the northern frontier. Just like in Lin Yuan's previous life, during the Three Kingdoms War, even the Yellow Turban Uprising that swept the world could not shake the supreme imperial power. However, Dongzhuo, who only led 3,000 cavalrymen into Luoyang, trampled on the imperial power, resulting in the chaotic end of the Eastern Han dynasty. However, before the chaotic war, it was an indisputable fact that the 18 warlords alliance in the Eastern Pass attacked Dongzhuo. Now, the northern frontier was Dongzhuo, who had trampled on the imperial power. Once he showed signs of swallowing the world, the various empires would form an alliance to suppress the northern frontier under the instigation of ambitious people. Therefore, the choice of the northern frontier was very important. Should they attack the Qingyang dynasty or the Chuyun dynasty and lay the foundation for the northern frontier's hegemony, or should they choose to punish themselves and rapidly weaken the northern frontier's potential threat to the various empires and let these ambitious people kill each other, or let them deal with their own internal conflicts first? Putting the most difficult opponent at the front is a very foolish decision. However, for the current northern frontier, putting the most difficult opponent at the front is the best choice. This is called a concrete analysis of the problem. More importantly, Li Zhong, you have to change your previous way of thinking. You can't just do whatever is beneficial to the northern frontier. As the king of the northern frontier, you have to think from a macro level about how to slow down the development of the northern frontier and reduce the wariness of the other factions. Lin Yuan, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. At the same time, he interrupted Li Zhong's train of thought. After a pause, Lin Yuan continued, war is a closed loop. It's divided into the production of resources, the allocation of resources, the consumption of resources, and the plundering of resources. I don't need an all-rounder to do everything. I've said before that if you become the king of the northern frontier, I'll make you a virtuous king in everyone's hearts, so there are many things you don't need to do. You just need to maintain the persona you set up when you reformed the northern frontier and carry out a series of construction and reforms on the northern frontier, as well as allocate the appropriate resources to the appropriate places. That's your mission. As for how to consume these resources and plunder more resources, that's what the generals and advisors of the northern frontier need to think about. Virtuous king. Li Zhong licked his lips. For a moment, he didn't know how to reply. This was because Li Zhong was behind the series of reforms on the northern frontier. His image in the eyes of others was hard to say, but in the eyes of the people of the northern frontier, Li Zhong was like a saint. Bearing such a persona, one could imagine the pressure Li Zhong was under. Therefore, Li Zhong could be said to have poured his heart and soul into all the government affairs of the northern frontier. Even during his rest time, he was constantly reviewing, fearing that there was something wrong with his settings that needed to be modified or supplemented. In other words, you're meddling too much. You just have to take care of the northern frontier and that's it. Li Axian glanced at Li Zhong and very bluntly translated. Shut up. Li Zhong glared at Li Axian, somewhat embarrassed and annoyed. Of course, he knew what Lin Yuan and Li Axian meant. They didn't despise him for meddling in everything. They were just giving him a clear warning. The northern frontier wasn't a small place like a county or prefecture. As time passed, the foundation of the northern frontier would grow bigger and bigger. Li Zhong could still meddle in all the government affairs now because he was so capable. But in the future, Li Zhong might not have the ability to manage the entire northern frontier by himself. Therefore, he had to give some authority appropriately and try to trust the officials who graduated from the Northern Frontier Academy. At the same time, he shouldn't meddle in those areas that he wasn't familiar with. He shouldn't act first and report later. Just like this time, in Li Zhong's eyes, Lin Yuan's strategic deployment was obviously dragging the northern frontier back. However, Li Zhong only gave his opinion. He didn't go against it and attack the Qingyang Empire and the Chuyun Empire. Without a doubt, Li Zhong actually had this ability. Because when Lin Yuan was in the Endless Sea, Li Zhong was in charge of all the military affairs at the northern frontier. Fortunately, it was all defensive battles. There wasn't a chance for Li Zhong to take action personally. Otherwise, once the various parties were ready to make decisions, no matter what Lin Yuan's plan was, they could only follow Li Zhong's arrangements. But on the other hand, was it wrong for Lin Yuan to first attack the Kumu dynasty to restrain him? Of course not. Because no matter how they avoided it, the Kumu Empire was a strong enemy that they would have to face sooner or later. The difference between attacking earlier and later was that once Lin Yuan's plan was executed, everyone would think that the northern frontier was stupid. They would also unknowingly let down their guard against the northern frontier. Before attacking the northern frontier, they would have to solve their own internal conflicts first. Only then would they have the capital to fight for the throne. This was Lin Yuan's goal. From a tactical perspective, Lin Yuan was dragging him back. However, from a strategic perspective, Lin Yuan suddenly pulled the northern frontier out of the chaos that was to come. He went from being the most outstanding duke to being the least threatening duke. Chapter 1131. Thank you for your advice. Li Zhong sincerely saluted Lin Yuan. To be honest, he really didn't have any dissatisfaction in his heart. Although Li Xian's words were a bit unpleasant and somewhat disrespectful to his elder brother, this was indeed his own problem. If it were anyone else, they would have some dissatisfaction with his behavior. It could even be said that because of Li Zhong's existence, those outstanding graduates of the Northern Frontier Academy almost didn't have any chance to personally handle government affairs after being assigned to the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion. The nominal leaders of the various yamen had all become mere decorations. Basically, they were just assistants and running errands. It would be a lie to say that they were satisfied with the current situation. To put it bluntly, those who could graduate from the Northern Frontier Academy and be assigned to the prince's mansion as an intern were basically favored by God. No matter how talented they were in cultivation, they had no problem handling all kinds of government affairs. But to put it bluntly, these people were just waiting to die under Li Zhong's hands, doing nothing meaningful. In addition to high positions and high salaries, in the Northern Frontier, their reputation in the Northern Frontier was even lower than that of the interns with average grades who were assigned to various yamen. This also led to these outstanding graduates being jokingly called the Prince's Mansion Staff Group or something like that. This was no small matter. The Northern Frontier Academy's enrollment standards were not very strict, but compared to the academic system in Lin Yuan's previous life, the Northern Frontier Academy emphasized the apprenticeship system, which meant that the academy taught you all kinds of courses and practical tricks. When you felt that you were qualified to graduate, you could directly apply to the instructor in charge of teaching you. The instructor would arrange some exams for you, and if the exams were successful, you could graduate. At the same time, according to the exam results, you would be assigned to different places for internships. It was conceivable that under such a system, students who could quickly finish all kinds of courses and graduate smoothly, and also achieve excellence in all aspects, and be directly sent to the Northern Frontier Prince's Mansion for internship in the Northern Frontier, the highest institution in the Northern Frontier, were of a high standard. Such a group of people, you let them just wait to die and run errands. Do you think they have any thoughts of killing people? They worked hard to cram in all kinds of knowledge and graduate before most people, wasn't it just for a good future? In the end, they even took off their pants, and this was what you showed them. Therefore, Li Zhong could be regarded as a strange man. His reputation could be said to be polarizing. In the eyes of the commoners, Li Zhong was a living sage that was hard to come by. In the eyes of the academy's students, Li Zhong was a monster who suppressed them and didn't allow them to stand out. Lin Yuan didn't have hands. If he had hands, he really wanted to hand. His head really hurt. What kind of freaks gathered in the Northern Frontier? In the military, there was Li Zhongxing, who had all kinds of military knowledge, but only knew how to do things according to the book. Occasionally, there would be a crazy freak. There was Li Xian, who learned a lot of theories, but was only interested in intelligence agencies. Now, his reputation in the Northern Frontier was enough to make children stop crying. As for the civil officials, there was also Li Zhong, who could be said to be all-round, but a little too steady. He didn't want to do anything that didn't benefit him. He felt that he could do anything, so he simply finished everything and didn't give anyone a chance to stand out. Birds of a feather flocked together. Lin Yuan now often wondered if there was something wrong with him. What kind of freaks were under his command? And in the prince's mansion in the Northern Frontier, when the big shots representing the supreme, the royal power, and the supervision were confiding in each other. In the distant battlefield of the Northern Frontier, cruel massacres were also rapidly erupting and ending. During the Spring and Autumn Warring States period, the Great Qin Empire had swept through the 6 countries, relying on all kinds of black technology. For example, a large number of military products were unearthed from Emperor Qin's tomb. Among them, the crossbows could be said to be standard, and the degree of error was so small that it made people's hair stand on end. All kinds of crossbows even had aiming devices that could be used until the end of the cold weapons era. Even more exaggerated was the terrifying shooting range of the Qin crossbows. Not to mention the Warring States period, even if one moved back to the Eastern Han Dynasty, there might not be many crossbows that could compare with it. And Lin Yuan's Ministry of Works in the northern frontier had taken this aspect of black technology to the extreme. In the Tianwu world, where cultivation and technology were both bright, he had perfectly integrated all kinds of knowledge that he had come into contact with in his previous life, creating a series of black technologies as well as military strategies that were not very popular in this world. Under such circumstances, unless an outside power directly attacked the northern frontier without declaring war, there was no way the northern frontier would be at a disadvantage. Otherwise, the northern frontier would not fall into a disadvantage in any battle. For example, the gunpowder buried under the mountain pass had directly buried all the blood Liao cavalry that had been gathered. It did not seem to have much effect. After all, there were not many blood Liao cavalry that had accompanied the army on this expedition. In addition, when the Shuangjin dynasty's allied army had been defeated, many of the blood Liao cavalry had disappeared. Thus, in terms of killing the enemy, it could be said that the gunpowder was completely wasted. This was the first time Lin Yuan's magically modified gunpowder had made an appearance in battle, so it was somewhat unsatisfactory. But in terms of strategy, in such a battle, all of the blood Liao cavalry that could still be gathered had been wiped out. After losing these heavy cavalry, what awaited the Shuangjin dynasty was the relatively invincible dragon cavalry of the northern frontier, as well as the Blackwater Army's formation that their warhorses could not penetrate. There was no doubt that the Shuangjin dynasty's army had not only lost in this battle, but they had also fallen into a situation where they were unable to fight back and were heavily surrounded by the army of the northern frontier. This was too terrible. Some of the khans of small and medium-sized tribes did not even dare to close their eyes at night. After all, there was no way to break the deadlock before them. Even if they sent out elite warriors, it would be meaningless. If they could not even penetrate the enemy's formation, how could they possibly break out of the encirclement? So what if they were in the airborne realm, heavenly strength realm, or nethervoid realm? Did they think that there was not a single cultivator in the northern frontier? According to the original organization of the 7 dynasties, the composition of the army of the northern frontier could definitely be regarded as extravagant. No dynasty dared to say that they could cultivate an army like the northern frontier. Not only were they all cultivators from top to bottom, but what was even more terrifying was that all of them were at least in the airborne realm. This was simply unreasonable. In the armies of other dynasties, airborne realm cultivators were at least at the level of mid-level officers. However, in the army of the northern frontier, they were at the level of soldiers. Compared to the armies of other dynasties, which were mostly made up of mortal evolution realm cultivators, the comprehensive combat power of the army of the northern frontier was almost at a crushing level. Chapter 1132. Regardless of whether it was Shenlin Jun or the Shueliao Knights, why were they able to become ace troops? Firstly, their standard equipment was basically 1 or 2 generations ahead of other troops. Unless they encountered other ace troops, they were practically invincible. Secondly, the techniques that they cultivated were carefully selected by their respective dynasties and were the most suitable techniques for them. Although they were not as terrifying as Lin Yuan's universal scripture, they were not too far off. Thirdly, the most important issue was resources. With the support of a dynasty behind them, they were simply not as tyrannical as aristocratic families and factions. Of course, if it was the kind of faction or aristocratic family that was overseen by the Heavenly Gate's guardian, they would not lose by too much. They would probably have a 40-60 ratio. With this level of resources, not to mention a group of carefully selected geniuses, even a group of pigs could be nurtured into martial tianpeng. Furthermore, for any dynasty, ace troops could not be used as firefighters. They would only be mobilized when the situation was truly critical and they had no choice but to be mobilized. Only then would they receive orders to go into battle. For example, when the northern frontier had just been established, according to the military organization of the Shenwu dynasty, other than the border troops that could not be mobilized to defend against the Shuangjin dynasty, Shenlin Jun of Wei River City was the closest to the northern frontier. Based on the power of the northern frontier at that time, not to mention Shenlin Jun's official troops, even if they dragged out 300,000 reserve troops, they would be able to directly overturn the entire northern frontier. However, in reality, Lei Qiuxing had no intention of mobilizing Shenlin Jun. Instead, he had mobilized troops from the southern coastal areas and even spent money to hire a large number of mercenaries to expand the troops. In a situation where there was no run-in, this was no different from a new army. Why? Was Lei Qiuxing a fool with a lot of money? That was obviously impossible. Every dynasty's trump-card army was the most powerful weapon in the royal family's hands. Their existence was more of a deterrent. No king would be foolish enough to send his trump-card troops to fight fires everywhere, unless it was a team like the Yun Tiger soldiers, which relied purely on equipment and secret techniques. Furthermore, they had to fight in mountainous and swampy terrains. Otherwise, they were not much stronger than an ordinary army. Their comprehensive ability was completely incomparable to Shenlin Jun, the Blackwater Army, and the Blood Liao Knights. As long as they did not use secret techniques to reduce their lifespan, instead of calling them soldiers, it would be better to call them the most talented cultivators in the royal family. Their mission was to cultivate in seclusion, spar, and constantly improve their cultivation base and combat ability. The more powerful they were, the more powerful the dynasty would be. But the northern frontier was different. If you asked the northern frontier to bring over 1 million troops, the northern frontier would definitely have no problem. Not only would the quality of the troops be good, but the level of their equipment would even be better than the other dynasties' trump-card troops. However, if the northern region were to recruit mercenaries, itinerant cultivators, low-grade cultivators, and the like the other dynasties, the northern region would be stretched to the limit if they were given an army of tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of soldiers. That was the difference between the northern frontier and the other dynasties. That was why Lin Yuan had the confidence to bite the hardest bone. He was confident that in the entire Tianwu world, no dynasty would be able to win against the northern frontier alone. In the camp of the Shuangjin dynasty's remaining troops, Shuangjin Khan sat next to a bonfire, chewing a piece of bacon like he was chewing wax. His face was so gloomy that it looked like it was going to drip water. Be it the northern frontier's Dragon Knights or the Blackwater Army, their combat ability was much stronger than the Shuangjin dynasty's warriors. What was more terrifying was that he could not make an accurate judgment of the northern frontier's army's numbers. No matter which direction the Shuangjin dynasty's army tried to break through, they would run into a large-scale northern frontier's army that would set up checkpoints and encircle them. It seemed like they could not escape from the northern frontier's control no matter how hard they tried. What was even more terrifying was that the northern frontier's army was not just encircling them one-sidedly. Instead, they were setting up checkpoints and checkpoints from the outside. They were gradually encircling Shuangjin Khan's army's area of activity. Ironically, Shuangjin Khan was very familiar with the northern frontier's army's tactics. Aside from plundering the borders of their neighboring countries every year, the Frost Mirror dynasty's greatest pastimes were two. One was hunting, and the other was playing polo. The so-called hunting was where the Frost Mirror dynasty would first encircle a hunting area and capture all kinds of wild beasts and demonic beasts before placing them in that area for the Frost Mirror dynasty to hunt for fun. These prey could only hide or ambush within the designated area because they had no way of leaving. If they didn't walk into a dead end, they would be killed by the Frost Mirror warriors who were in charge of guarding the area. Shuangjin Khan was a person who liked to enjoy life. He would hold at least 2 hunting events every year. This time, the Northern Frontier's army started their first hunting event on the grassland. They were the prey in the jar. It was humiliating. But there was nothing they could do. Not to mention whether they could defeat the Northern Frontier's army or not, they were not even willing to fight them. They were encircling their area of activity step by step. But as long as the Shuangjin dynasty's army did not try to escape, they would not take the initiative to attack them even if they encountered them. It was as if they were waiting for something. More importantly, the revered Shuangjin Tian Kagan's control over his army was abnormally weak. His loyal Blood-Ridge Knights had all perished at the checkpoint, and the rest were small and medium-sized tribes loyal to the imperial family. But this loyalty was clearly limited. To put it bluntly, they were loyal to the heavenly Kagan who could give them a better life, not this stubborn old man who had led the Shuangjin Tian warriors into despair. He often saw the khans of other tribes gathering together and whispering. He also heard that someone wanted to take his head and send it to the northern frontier in exchange for a way out. What was more terrifying was that at first, he could still use Shuangjin Khan's name to command some troops. But as time went by, Shuangjin Khan's name became less and less useful. Not to mention the other tribes, even some members of the Shuel Yao tribe would stare at him with eyes that made his hair stand on end from time to time. He recognized that gaze. It was the burning desire to survive. He had seen it in the eyes of many people who wailed under the scimitar. These were all hidden dangers that were still brewing, but he was helpless against them. He couldn't think of a way to deal with them unless he could lead the Frost Mirror warriors and find a way to survive. Otherwise, these hidden dangers would erupt sooner or later. When that time came, let alone their heads, even their limbs and organs would be cut into countless pieces and sent to the northern realms to be rewarded for meritorious deeds. Chapter 1133. Why did they have to provoke the northern frontier? He couldn't answer this question. Even thinking about it made him feel like he was suffocating. His favorite son had died at the northern frontier. His undefeated glory had come to an end at the northern frontier. Not to mention, his wealth was like flowing water. These were all important factors that were enough to destroy his rationality and cause him to launch a war against the northern frontier. However, the grassland was an unreasonable place. A place with abundant water and grass today could turn into a swamp tomorrow. Just like the wars of the Shuangjin dynasty, they were never reasonable. If you won, you would have everything you wanted. If you lost, you would have nothing. Now that the war had come to this point, the path in front of him was clear. He either had to find a way to survive as soon as possible, or wait for the Black Jiao at the northern frontier to give the order. Then, his warriors would swarm him like rabid dogs and eat him alive. I've taken a look at the encampments of all the tribes, and the situation is not optimistic. Like us, the tribes that went on the expedition, we brought some supplies with us. Before the transport line was cut off, we also saved some supplies. However, those small and medium-sized tribes that followed us and wanted to pick up the leftovers were already running out of supplies in all aspects, especially food. I'm afraid that after a period of time, there will be a tragedy of horses being killed and eaten. A middle-aged man in a white fox fur coat took off the scimitar at his waist and sat across from Frost Mirror Khan with a serious expression. He stared at the bonfire in front of him, lost in thought for a moment. Eating and drinking horse meat and drinking horse blood was acceptable. Even in Lin Yuan's previous life, there were many sieges where people had no choice but to kill all the livestock and drink their blood. Even the war horses and oxen couldn't escape this fate. If that wasn't enough, then they would have to enter an even more tragic phase, which was the so-called eating people or eating people. But why were there so few people who ate horse meat? First of all, no matter the time and place, war horses were a very scarce resource. Just like at the end of the Qin dynasty and the beginning of the Han dynasty, Xiongnu plundered almost 90% of Qin Shi Huang's wealth and only managed to raise 40,000 cavalrymen. At the beginning of the Han dynasty, Liu Bang fought against the Xiongnu and drove them out of the Han dynasty to the grasslands. He was at a disadvantage because he did not have warhorses. He was surrounded on Mount White and almost led to the demise of the Han dynasty. A person who could own a warhorse couldn't possibly be a common soldier. Ordinary people didn't have access to horsemanship, nor did they know how to raise and train horses. Therefore, if one wanted to become a cavalry in the era of cold weapons, one must first have a good family background. The longer history went, the more this was true. After all, even generals couldn't afford to ride a horse. Some ministers even had to take ox carts to court. How could a common soldier ride a horse? Second of all, a lot of resources were needed to cultivate a cavalry. Even if one cultivated a cavalry at the lowest level, the resources invested would be enough to cultivate 3 to 5 infantrymen. People who had eaten horse meat would have a special smell on them. This smell couldn't be smelled by humans. Just like how dogs wouldn't eat dog bones, people who had eaten horse meat would be repelled by the horse. Without a certain level of physical fitness, horsemanship, and equipment, being repelled by the horse meant that the person was disqualified from being a cavalry. Of course, the Frost Mirror grassland didn't lack warhorses. However, people who had eaten horse meat would also be repelled by the horse. In an extremely harsh environment like the grassland, after losing a reliable companion like a horse, it was impossible to survive with only 2 legs. The harsh environment of the grasslands was not only due to sudden changes in the environment, but also a large number of other factors. For example, when it snowed in winter, even cultivators could freeze to death, and some reference points would also be covered up. This was known as the White Disaster. However, when the weather was hot, some grasslands could even be set ablaze. These 2 situations could be said to be very common. Without experience and amount, once one encountered such a situation, only death would await them. For any Frost Mirror man, eating horse meat and drinking horse blood could solve their immediate problems. However, in reality, it was tantamount to giving up their right to continue living in the grassland. Once the situation worsened, the first thing they would do wouldn't be to kill their own mounts to fill their stomachs. Instead, they would rob the other tribes of their food, or even kill them in exchange for a chance to survive. Frost Mirror Khan gulped down 2 mouthfuls of water and swallowed the bacon in his mouth. He said slowly, "Our situation isn't any better. If we tighten our belts, we can still survive for a while. In about half a month, we will also run out of food. Therefore, not only do we not have the ability to support them, we don't even have the right to pity them." The middle-aged man's lips twitched. He was still staring at the dancing bonfire. He said helplessly, "Then we can only wait for the camp to explode." "Humph, they're just a bunch of rats. I can see that they all want to skin me alive. However, if the northern frontier doesn't say anything, they won't dare to touch a single hair of mine. Because they don't know what the northern frontier wants. They don't know if the northern frontier wants to live or die. Therefore, they can only stay in this stalemate." Frost Mirror Khan said disdainfully as he hung his water bag back on his waist. The middle-aged man shook his head. He said bitterly, "That's true. However, the problem is that without food, hunger will drive those people crazy. When they attack our camp, I'm afraid some people will be more than happy to do so. They will even fan the flames. How dare they?" Frost Mirror Khan couldn't help but raise his voice. He said coldly, "No matter how poor I am still the heavenly Khan of the Frost Mirror grassland. That black Jiao doesn't have the guts to break the balance between the 7 dynasties. Yes, it definitely doesn't. It's just an animal. What does it know? At most, it wants to teach us a lesson." The middle-aged man shrugged and didn't comment on Frost Mirror Khan's hysterical self-comforting words. Did the northern frontier really not dare to break the balance between the 7 dynasties? If that was the case, then why did he arrange all this? Or, would the Black Jiao allow the Shuangjin dynasty to continue existing after eating up the main force of the Frost Mirror grassland? Wait, Frost Mirror Khan lowered his voice again. He said in a low voice, Third Brother already knew that something was wrong with the northern frontier. It's my fault. I didn't trust him and even killed his messenger. However, he must know about our predicament. Let's wait. Maybe his reinforcements are already on the way. Am I right? That must be it. I am the Honorable Frost Mirror Khan. I will not die in a place like this. Chapter 1134. You don't know your son very well, the middle-aged man wanted to reply. However, he knew that Frost Mirror Khan was on the verge of breaking down. Once he knew how bad the situation was, not only would he not be able to wake the Heavenly Khan up, but he would also break down completely and lose his last bit of value. Yes, his last bit of value. Every man for himself, and the devil takes the hindmost. The middle-aged man didn't want to die, and he didn't want to die because of someone else's foolishness. That was why he pretended to be a loyal bodyguard. However, once the situation changed, he would be the one to take Mirrorfrost's head. However, this conversation made the middle-aged man think of another hair-raising possibility. The cunning third prince would most likely go to the northern frontier. However, it was hard to say whether he would come to save them or not. Meanwhile, in the mansion of the king of the northern frontier, a guard in a Kirin uniform bowed to Lin Yuan, Li Axian, and Li Zhong. Then he said in a deep voice, a group of cavalrymen suddenly appeared outside the city. They are from the Shuangjin dynasty. They said that they must meet the king of the northern frontier because it concerns the diplomatic relations between the two countries. I have received confirmation that the leader of this group of cavalrymen is the third prince of the Shuangjin dynasty. Crack! Li Zhong crushed a pair of iron balls in his hand. Li Axian reached out his hand and touched his chin, looking pensive. On the contrary, Lin Yuan's eyes were calm, as if he was not surprised by the appearance of this scene. Li Zhong sprinkled the iron powder in his hand and said with a gloomy face, well done. The third prince is indeed a cunning fox. He knew that we wanted to kill him, so he asked Dariachi to pretend to be him and appear near the Wei River. He lured away Zhang Shuzhu and the other MI7 members who had a blood feud with the Frost Mirror barbarian. After that, he snuck into the northern frontier. Now that the time is right, he jumped out of his own accord. Really? Yes. Really? Ah. The last 5 words were squeezed out through gritted teeth, one at a time, with pauses between his teeth. From this, it could be seen that Li Zhong was extremely angry at the third prince's actions. Previously, he had been in charge of all the dispatching in the northern frontier. Especially after Lin Yuan had sent the army into the Hingduan Mountains, he had set up such a murderous plot against the third prince. In the end, not only had he been fainted, he had also been slapped in the face. Strange. Li Axian narrowed his eyes slightly and said, although the brocade guard can't completely infiltrate the Frost Mirror grassland, it's not like they don't know anything about what's happening there. I'm certain that Dariachi, who's playing the role of the third prince, has always been under our surveillance. So, where did the third prince hide? How did he communicate with Dariachi? How did he know that we've already forced the Frost Mirror dynasty's army into a dead end? Li Axian's point of view was very interesting. At this time, it was tantamount to admitting that the brocade guard was not capable enough. But from another perspective, it could be understood that Li Axian felt that the brocade guard who had infiltrated the Frost Mirror grassland had sent back false information. Now, there might be a mole in the northern frontier. At the very least, it was the frontline personnel who had failed in their duties and had to be dealt with severely. Just thinking about it for a while, Li Zhong seemed to smell a strong smell of blood. It should be known that although the brocade guard was under Li Axian, it was not Li Axian who had the final say. Not to mention that there were die-hard loyalists of Luo Su, there was no suitable reason to get rid of them. Moreover, the Brocade Guard was too close to the top officials of the northern frontier, especially Yu Dingqin. Now, he had joined forces with Zhang Shuzhu to form the MI7, but there were still members of Yu Dingqin's faction in the Brocade Guard. Li Axian was looking for an excuse to kill. Glancing at Li Axian's indifferent eyes, the Brocade Guard who reported the news suddenly trembled. He said in a low voice, "Commander, we really don't know what happened to the third prince. It was like he suddenly appeared at the northern frontier. Our brothers almost plowed the area and found nothing unusual. This, humph." Li Axian snorted and his eyes turned cold. He said, "Is this the final explanation you're going to give me? Then, why did the third prince of the Shuangjin dynasty come in when the two countries were at war? And why did a piece of trash like you come to report the news when the third prince was about to arrive at Shunning City? All the outposts and strongholds set up along the way were all destroyed. No one could report the news. You also said that you only knew the news when the third prince appeared outside Shunning City. You don't even know how he came here." The Brocade Guard who reported the news was silent for a moment. Then he said with an embarrassed expression, "Yes, he came with the wind. I heard that it was not that no one found him on the way, but that all the people who found him were all inexplicably sick. They were in a coma for a few days before waking up. That's why no information was sent back." *T, you think? Li Axian's expression changed and he suddenly wanted to curse. "Are you telling me a ghost story? Even in ghost stories, people would fall sick after seeing a ghost." The embroidered uniform guard took 2 steps back after being scolded by Li Axian. Then, he said timidly, "It's true. I heard that this is the work of an almighty person. Moreover, that almighty person said that if he is willing, a plague will break out in the northern region. At that time, it won't be as simple as being in a coma for 3 days. Therefore, when I came to deliver the message, I specifically mentioned this matter. He also said that if the Dragon King isn't willing to meet them, they can leave immediately. Everyone can fight it out. Also, that almighty person said that he is called Yu Jiang." Yu Jiang. Lin Yuan's eyes suddenly widened. After the war between the dragon race and the phoenix race in Kirin, the dragon race retreated to the 4 seas and became the overlords. This saying had been widely spread. But in fact, the overlords of the 4 seas were not the dragon race of the 4 seas. In other words, it was not only the dragon race of the 4 seas. The emperor gave birth to Yujiang. He was conferred the title of God of the Eastern Sea and ruled the Eastern Sea. And Yujiang. He was born in Yujiang and was conferred the title of the God of the North Sea. He wasn't the kind of god on the investiture of the gods who could be ordered around. Instead, he was conferred by the human king and was a legitimate overlord who ruled over a region. His strength wasn't inferior to the dragon race in the 4 seas. Yujiang. He was conferred the title of the God of the East Sea by the Yellow Emperor Shenyuan. Yujiang was even more powerful. He didn't rely on his father to make a living. He was Xuanchu's minister. It could be said that the Yellow Emperor conferred the East Sea to Yujiang. The Mystic Emperor conferred the North Sea to Yujiang. There didn't seem to be a big difference, but don't forget that Xuanchu was the descendant of the Yellow Emperor when he was on the throne. At that time, Yinglong had already assisted the Yellow Emperor to unify the world and completed the plan of the Fushan Talisman. The strength of the dragon race that became the totem wasn't something the Yellow Emperor could compare with.